call this meeting to order. This is a City Commission meeting, a special meeting, as we continue with our budget and go through our budget process. I believe we need to do, I guess we don't need to do roll call. It's not on here, so we'll move forward. Commissioners, just a couple things about today. We have two City Commission resolutions.
But we acknowledge we have a quorum present.
Thank you. We acknowledge we have a quorum
With all
present.
commissioners on the dais.
Yeah, well, Commissioner Robbins isn't up here, but
He's just walking.
he'll be right back.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Commissioners, a couple things about this morning. Oh, thank you, City Clerk. We asked our City Clerk to turn down the lights just a little bit because they are blinding us. Thank you. We don't have to do roll call this morning, correct?
You can roll call in a minute.
I think we probably should.
Let's do it. Commissioner Purdue,
Hello, present.
Commissioner Asasi,
Present.
Commissioner O'Connor,
Present.
Commissioner Robbins,
Present.
Commissioner Moody. Present. And Mayor Bliss.
Yes, and Commissioners, can I get a motion to excuse Commissioner Knight?
So moved.
Support.
All right, moved and supported. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, Commissioners, we have a presentation this morning. We'll be covering 4 topics from our budget. We have our presenters with us up here this morning. And then we have 2 City Commission resolutions. These are pretty simple. They're just setting public hearings for May 16th. One is for the proposed property taxes, and one is for service provision fees. And then we'll end with public comment, and then we'll adjourn. So with that, I think I will turn this over to our city manager to get started. And then we'll try to take a break depending on how quickly we're moving through the agenda. And perhaps after the break, we'll come back and do the 2 scheduled resolutions and then do the final 2 presentations.
Yeah, Mayor, before we begin, I just want to check for any time constraints commissioners may have this morning.
Yeah, so I need to leave at 11:30 a.m. and I'll turn it over to President of the Commission, Commissioner O'Connor, to take it if we're going beyond 11:30.
All right, thank you.
Yeah,
Mike.
I need to leave by 12.
okay, perfect. Thank you. All right.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Commissioners. Last week, you received the preliminary fiscal plan, and I provided a high-level overview. And you've also received the actual documents. Hopefully, you've taken some time to go through it. Before we begin the presentation on the sections of the plan today, what I'd like to do is pass out the residence guide to the preliminary fiscal plan. In years past, this has been produced after the formal budget has been adopted. But this year, we decided to make a guide for the proposed budget. And that was also released last week. So very high level overview of the budget for members of the public to understand. But today we intend to go deeper into some of the proposals, deeper into policy, deeper into outcomes. And we're going to have 4 sections of reviews. And what I would ask is you let all the presenters present, and then we will pause and take questions. So the first section this morning is Safe Community. We have 4 departments represented, and they have taken time to highlight the salient points of the budget and policy. And after they conclude, we'll come back and see what questions you might have, and then we'll have another group of department directors take us through economic prosperity and affordability and so on and so forth. And we'll probably take the break, Mayor, maybe after the economic prosperity and affordability section, if that's okay.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, so with that, if you, Joel, if you can advance the slide for me. All right. So again, go back, please. Again, we introduced the preliminary fiscal plan last week, and you heard from me and the CFO provide both an overview of the proposed budget as well as a financial overview. This week, we will highlight the 4 sections as I previously discuss, and next week on the 9th, we'll come back and highlight health and environment, stormwater, vital streets, and mobility. And depending how the discussions go today and the 9th, we'll determine whether or not we need to have an additional follow-up session on the 16th. But If not, we'll just have the public hearing that night, and then your final opportunity for deliberation before adoption will be on the 23rd. So I will now ask the department heads to begin our safe community discussion, and I'd like to again congratulate our recently appointed fire chief, Chief Brad Brown, and congratulate him. He was installed, or had his installation ceremony last night, and he will begin us with the discussion on safe community. Chief.
All right. Thank you, City Manager. I'd like to start out like we always start out in the fire department. Yeah, that's all. Okay. Like we always start out in the fire department with our mission, vision, and values. That's our true north. That's what guides our actions each day. And frankly, it plays heavily into our fiscal planning. So the mission of the Grand Rapids Fire Department is to value all people by saving lives, protecting property, and responding to the needs of the entire community. And there's a few words that were added in as all and entire during our last revision of our strategic plan. And that was very important to not only myself and the executive staff, but the members that are out in the streets every day. We wanted to make sure the community knew that we cared about each and every one of them in each and every part of our city. And you're going to see a lot of good progress in this proposed budget from the fire department. So to get into a few more details, our total authorized strength did go up to 210. That is due to a SAFER grant, which I'll give a few more details on that in a few minutes. We were able to fund several very proactive programs. These are good things for the city, good things for the department. Our homeless outreach team, our residential safety program, which is up over 70,000 smoke alarms into residents' homes now, and our cadet program. This is our first year of the cadet program, and we have 6 youth from our community right now working alongside our firefighters wearing the same patch as us. So we're very excited for that cadet program. And finally, the strategic land acquisition. There's a few things we can never get more of: time and land. In this city, land is becoming very hard to come by. And the city manager, the fiscal office, and the fire department worked very hard with your support to make sure that we could secure land for future construction projects. And I will cover that in more detail on the horizon issues slide as well. So, talked about some good things. Let me talk about a few challenges. Our first responders were out over 31,000 hours last year in the streets on emergencies. That was responding to over 25,000 alarms. This is as busy as the Grand Rapids Fire Department has ever been. We have 18 recruits scheduled to graduate here very shortly. They are much needed. However, we're projecting up to 14 retirements by the end of the year. So we're essentially breaking even with this next class coming through, and that is placing a lot of additional strain on our overtime budget. And at some point, that decision comes along where is it people or is it overtime? And I think we're getting close to that. We have started forcing back on mandatory overtime in some situations. I never want to put my people in that situation, but of course they answer the phone, they step up, and they make sure that our rigs are staffed every day at a certain level to take care of our community. And then that last bullet, that's what I just alluded to, is city manager, CFO, and myself are really looking at what's the right size for overtime versus the right size for staff. Well, day 2 on the job, and I'm coming to you asking for $40 million. So far, I think things are going pretty good. The fire department budget has gone up significantly in the last few years, keeping pace with personnel costs, contractual raises, and frankly, the cost of doing business. Everything is more expensive. I'll remind you of that ladder truck you helped us purchase last year for $1.7 million. That's now $2 million. So in 1 year, the cost has gone up $300,000 for a piece of our equipment. So that's what we're dealing with. On the capital side, we've worked very closely with facilities and with fiscal to bring you a very aggressive plan to bring a lot of our infrastructure up to speed. We're replacing roofs, we're replacing doors, garage doors, a kitchen, our station alerting system, which had a catastrophic failure last summer, and so we're really looking forward to getting things up to speed. The other thing that we've been able to work very closely with the CFO on is establishment of sinking funds. This is good proactive fiscal management. We are paying ahead for our next round of self-contained breathing apparatus. We are paying ahead for a lot of different things now. So this is good proactive fiscal management. Some enhancement of services that you're going to notice. The SAFER grant. This was a 3-year, no-cost grant from the federal government to add 8 additional firefighters. Now, these firefighters are going in very specific spots in our deployment model. We currently run approximately 47 personnel a day. Sometimes it floats up a little bit, but 47 is what we run. That's our base model. We're adding 2 per day to that, so we're going to 49. One will be out of MLK Station, and they're going to be assigned to the truck there, but 2 to 3 times a day, they will cross-staff the utility. We are out on the highway so many times, and I'm telling you, I am way more nervous with my crews on the highway than in a structure fire. The second person is going to go down into the 3rd Ward and staff Truck 4 out of the Kalamazoo Avenue Fire Station. That was our intermediate step until we can construct Station 12 to get a few more resources down there. When that truck now pulls up to a structure fire, they can run 2 teams of 2. 2 people are going to function inside the house, 2 people can function outside the house. That one body is a force multiplier. The next thing was our emergency management program. I know that you've heard a lot about that and you've interacted with our emergency manager quite frequently. It's time for that program to keep pace with our city. So we did a grant and we're able to add an emergency management specialist who's going to focus on community outreach. They're going to be starting our community emergency response team, our CERT program. So during large-scale emergencies, we can leverage the skills in our community and help respond to emergencies more effectively. And then finally, we have a few critical assessments that we're going to have a third-party expert come in and assist us with. We are continued to focus on our residential safety program, one of the premier fire prevention and safety programs in the country. We're going to continue funding the homeless outreach team. And finally, the cadet program, which I mentioned earlier. Horizon topics. This is my last slide before I turn it over to Police Chief. We have a lot of decisions to make in the very near term with the fire department and staffing and funding. We're moving in the right direction. I'm very excited at the future for our city and our department. However, we're facing really aged infrastructure. The Kalamazoo Fire Station, the new station, needs to be constructed. The Division Avenue Fire Station, constructed in 1926. We've secured land for that. We now fully utilize that old, somewhat dilapidated building to the best of our abilities, and at some point in the near future, we'll need to construct a fire station there. The Chester Fire Station, well over 100 years old, still operating. Last year, we had to sink a couple $100,000 into emergency repairs for that structure. And finally, our fire training center, currently housed in the water building along the river. So those are some major projects that we need to consider and really think about how we're going to fund those. On the operating side of things, so moving away from infrastructure, on the operating side of things, we need to staff the new Kalamazoo station. We need to look at how we're fixing our fire trucks. Currently, our vendors are so backed up, and we have 3 vendors we utilize. We're waiting months to get trucks back. We think we can do it better in-house, much like our city garage. So our plan is to hire fire truck mechanics in the next few years once we have a suitable facility and work on our own equipment. We have our cadet program. We have the increase in apparatus and building maintenance funds. And finally, our alternative response model, the HOT team. And my vision is to not only keep utilizing the HOT team, but to grow a community paramedicine team. There's a real need to perform proactive social work and medical work out in our community on people that are not necessarily homeless, but it's very similar work. And so those are some of the horizon issues I bring to you today for consideration. How this is going to be funded, I don't know, but that's for us to work on collaboratively.
Thank you, Chief.
Yep.
And just to add before Chief Winstrom starts, this issue regarding the potential fire safety millage is something we will have more discussion on after the budget's adopted. There is no planned proposal in this budget for that type of assessment, but we will have further discussions about the cost of that and the process post-budget. Chief Winstrom.
Thank you, sir. The Grand Rapids Police Department also opens by recognizing our values: integrity, courage, accountability, respect of others, and equity. The acronym I CARE, appropriate for the heart of service required to succeed in improving the lives of those in our community. Our vision: to be the safest city and most trusted police department. Our mission: safeguard our city, bring justice for victims, ensure a feeling of safety for all Grand Rapidians, build trust and positive relationships. Our strategic plan priorities: safety, innovation, and engagement. Our biggest challenge to providing full coverage and optimal police service is achieving full staffing. We are working to fill 38 sworn vacancies with the class of 10, which started yesterday, 2 additional GVSU Academy classes in the upcoming fiscal year, and increasing lateral hires. Although shorthanded, the call volume has not diminished, and GRPD responded over 76,000 calls for service this past year. The blue section of this pie chart represents personnel costs. A vast majority of the remainder, shaded in gray, is fleet, facilities, insurance, and information technology. In comparison to the entire police budget, therefore, discretionary resources are minimal. As we seek public safety through innovation and collaboration, we are seeking budget allocations to continue our use of the risk terrain modeling software utilized in our data-informed community engagement program, and look to continue our innovative alternate responses with the homeless outreach team and, of course, a mobile crisis response. Thankful for the support of our recruiting and engagement efforts, which are kicking into high gear with EPIC. Looking to begin delivering content as early to GRPD as early as September. We are now able to offer seniority carryover to attract lateral transfers from other police departments. We are focusing on positioning the department with local talent long-term through our Pathways to Policing program in conjunction with the Boys and Girls Club, Explorer program, and our expanded internship program. We've been hosting open houses for interested police officer candidates and continue our CLEAR program for both men and women returning from incarceration. Our training budget ensures us the ability to train the most up-to-date and best practices in the ever-changing profession of policing. We recognize that policing will always be reforming, and we will never be complacent. We train on the most up-to-date practices on topics ranging everywhere from constitutional policing and implicit bias to control tactics and emergency vehicle operations. The role of the police department is to prevent and reduce crime, to respond to calls for service, to investigate crimes, and to build trust with our city. Our first key metric is a measure of violent crime across the city, followed by the measure of percentage of beats covered by officers, the number of officers receiving crisis intervention training, and finally, community engagement events attended. We continue to maintain our public-facing metric dashboard on GRPD's website. Grand Rapids Police Department is committed to equity, diversity, sustainability, and accountability, and we highlight some of the initiatives here, such as our CLEAR program with our partners at Michigan Department of Corrections, Oakdale Park Church, Michigan Works, and 70x7, where we support those returning from incarceration to ensure their success in our city, our sponsorships to pay for training of police recruits, and our victim advocate program. We have a diverse executive staff, have increased the diversity of our command staff, and are looking to increase recruit diversity through our Pathways to Policing partnership with the Boys and Girls Club, our Explorers program for Grand Rapids youth, age 14 to 20, and our internship program, all ways to intentionally grow our own future officers right here in the city. We'll continue to evaluate our use of eco-friendly vehicles and continue our commitment to high standards and accountability, our work with OPA, and commitment to transparency. As outlined further in our updated strategic plan, we are working on the priorities on the horizon of partnerships founded on trust, full staffing to meet our goals, seeking out innovation to prevent crime, better communication, transparency, and accountability, innovating collaborative responses for better outcomes for calls for service for those experiencing mental health crisis, youth outreach, training our officers on topics embraced by the community, such as de-escalation, implicit bias, and cultural competency, and always seeking out efficiency in our operations. Thank you.
All right, good morning. Can I have the clicker, please? Thank you. So I'll also start with OPA's mission and vision. Oh, well, good morning. I'm Brandon Davis. I have the pleasure of serving as the Director of Oversight and Public Accountability for the City of Grand Rapids. I'll start with OPA's mission and values. So the mission of our department is through targeted change, accountability, restorative justice, empowerment, and engagement. OPA will help create and improve just outcomes and respectful relationships between public safety and community. We recognize in order to do that, we have to be value-driven. So not only do we follow the values of the city, but we also lead with OPA's values, which are true justice. That stands for transparency, always being upfront and honest about everything we say and do. Responsibility, always being accountable and considering the big picture. Unity, that means that we're working to build bridges. And we lead with equity as well. And we're always advancing just outcomes and opportunities by leading with racial equity to address the root causes of disparities. And finally, justice. We're always operating with integrity and doing the right thing. So on this slide, we have just a few of the value-based programs and services that OPA works with. And we are proud to say that everything we do in OPA leads with equity. Every program that we have, every initiative that we have is equity-based. But we also work in the city's other values, including innovation, and that's Civil Rights Youth Academy, our Cure Violence Program, and Clean Slate GR, which are innovative ways that we are addressing disparities in the city of Grand Rapids and really across the state of Michigan. Further sustainability, the creation of our Regrow, a returning citizen reentry program, as well as accountability when we look at OPA, the creation and the finalization of OPA's operational policy, which many of you know has been a task. It's been a journey for us to get there. So we're grateful for the partnership of other city departments and the leadership of the city manager in helping us get to that space. And then there's collaboration. So that's our community informed training program, as well as our Know Your Rights programming and our immigrant and refugee engagement services. And of course, we're always leading with customer service. You'll see that the colors here represent when these programs are expected to be implemented or when they have been implemented. So we'll start with a brief overview of our community-informed training, and we did have the opportunity to brief commission recently, so I won't take up all of your time on these slides, but you'll recall that we launched in the third quarter of FY23, and this program is a joint initiative between OPA and law enforcement. The program goal is to train. When we talk about training, we're training public safety to understand community concerns and to increase cultural competency. We're also working to repair bridges of trust between public safety and the community it serves, and to amplify the community's voice and role in policing. We're working to increase respect and understanding of marginalized groups and to normalize positive interaction between public safety and community. So the way this works is that community members are welcome to submit proposals to OPA, and we'll work with both the police department, the fire department, and the Office of Equity and Engagement to work through what these trainings look like. Those trainings can come to us in any form. It can be an idea or it can be a complete proposal. Either way, we're interested in providing the training that community is seeking to provide to our law enforcement departments. In order to help community understand this and to really engage about what community is looking for, there are 5 engagement sessions that have been scheduled, 2 of which have already been held, but the other 3 are scheduled to be with the Easttown Community Neighborhood Association, the Southwest Business Association, and the Roosevelt Park Neighborhood Association. And the dates and times for those sessions are listed on this slide as well. In addition to our work with community-informed training, we also have a continuation of our traffic stop study. So we know that in 2017, there was a traffic stop data analysis study that was completed here in Grand Rapids. And OPA has been given the responsibility of analyzing and reporting on traffic stop data at a minimum of a biannual basis. So we're in the process of beginning that process now. The goal of the study is to compare the results of 2017 to more recent traffic stop data and assess the trends observed over the past 5 years. I think it's important important for us to note that the goal is simply to assess data. It's not to enter into this with any predisposed conclusions. It's to make sure that we're continuing to keep the commitment that we made to community. So preliminary research questions there is there evidence of race, ethnicity, or gender-based disparities in traffic stop studies, and how have the trends in those traffic stops shifted over time? Now, ultimately, this purpose is to follow up on those previous set of recommendations. Initial data requests regarding this will begin to go out this month. So another topic and area that we've been working in is the Cure Violence expansion. So Cure Violence, as you know, is an evidence-based violence reduction and intervention program that approaches violence with the understanding that violence is an epidemic process that can be stopped using the same health strategies employed to fight epidemics. So in 2021, the city selected the Grand Rapids Urban League to be our implementing agency. And we selected an initial target area that was located in the city's 3rd Ward as an area of focus. Now, this is a long-term strategy, but we've garnered positive results, including, but not limited to, negotiating treaties with rival gangs and seeing the results of violence reduction. So through the participatory budgeting process and specific community requests for expansion, the city has been working with the Urban League and Cure Violence Global to expand the reach of Cure Violence here in Grand Rapids. And we're working to begin that in the 2nd Ward. So feedback from participants has revealed the need for another component to the program. So the original model for Cure Violence includes the things that we've been doing. We've been following the model quite well, but one part that is not included is the education component. And what we've heard from people who have participated in the Cure Violence program is after we're done with the program, we need some type of credential that allows us to continue to move forward, that allows us to continue to make the progress that we've been making through the help of the program. So the expansion, which we'll give more detail in a full briefing on at a later date, but that expansion includes an education component. It includes a credentialing component where we're working with local universities and community colleges to build out a credential certificate program that would allow community members who participate in Cure Violence program to have that and move forward in our workforce. In order to expand the reach of Cure Violence into the 2nd Ward, we will need to increase staffing levels. So staffing levels are now at 8 for this program, and we're looking to move that to 14, and that'll include the addition of 2 additional violence interrupters, which are the individuals who are actually on the street having interactions with people in community and helping to diffuse violent interactions, and then also an additional outreach worker. And we know it's important that bringing on an outreach worker, especially in the 2nd Ward, that we bring on someone who is bilingual. So we're looking specifically to hire bilingual staff in these spaces. We're also looking to add a resource coordinator and a program director, and then a site supervisor for the 2nd Ward, which is keeping with the model that is already designed by Cure Violence. Lastly, we're looking for a data specialist and an in-school specialist. One of the things that the Cure Violence team has continued to see is that there is a need for this type of interaction in schools. So this in-school specialist will be able to do a lot of the in-school work so that the rest of our Cure Violence team can focus on being on our streets. And again, a full briefing regarding this expansion will be provided in the 1st quarter. So Horizon topics for OPA is that OPA staffing is largely grant funded. Right now, our data specialist, who's our Harvard Bloomberg Fellow, that fellowship ends in FY24. And then we also were fortunate enough to have 2 justice analysts who are also grant funded through our Kellogg grant, and that grant funding is set to end in fiscal year 25. Additionally, OPA has been given the responsibility of managing the city's Axon contract, which includes but is not limited to our body-worn cameras, and that is set to expire on January 1st of 2025. So we will begin the RFP process in January of 2024. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Sarah Breen. I'm the clerk of the court at the Grand Rapids District Court, and I'm actually here on behalf of our court administrator, Tanya Todd. So good morning. First slide we have here is a brief overview of the 61st District Court. our jurisdiction handles misdemeanor and traffic cases, the initiation of felony cases through preliminary exam, civil lawsuits up to $25,000, landlord-tenant cases, small claims cases, civil infractions, and we also perform wedding ceremonies. We have 3 problem-solving courts, 2 of those being sobriety and 1 being a drug court, and we are also working to resurrect our community outreach court. We have an eviction prevention program as well as an eviction diversion program that partners with other community agencies working with those at risk of being unhoused. Below that is the efforts of our work crew program, and they currently handle contracts with the city on various cleanup and maintenance projects, And then I have a quick staffing overview. We currently have 83 employees, 68 of them being full-time. The following slides will provide an overview of our expenditures and revenue that helps visualize where our money is coming from and also where it's going. So if you look here, everything highlighted in green is all costs associated with personnel, which accounts for 59% of that budget. Everything in the pinkish color is our operations overhead, is our, building rentals and lease management, our general overhead, which also includes our lease agreement, which is $125,000 per year. And then everything in the yellow is our fees and transmittals and miscellaneous, which includes like jury payments, indigent defense services, contract negotiations for attorneys, and so on. And then the 3 smaller sections highlighted in green, orange, and that purplish blue color are IT and software, supplies, and training. And just to touch base on the 3 of those account for about 2.5% of our budget, and generally those are the ones that we have day-to-day control over, although they still are imperative, like supplies and in our case management system. Moving forward to our revenue slide, as you can see here, our $6.2 million approximately is 46% of the funding that comes from the general funds from the city. $2.5 million in ARPA funds or the COVID relief, and then 8.99% from the operating transfers, which is our bonds. And to make a quick note of that, I know we've spoke about this in a couple other meetings, but both bonds, one earlier than the other, will be paid off in fiscal year 2026. Everything highlighted in orange is our internally generated funds and inflow that comes from our court filing fees, contracts with our work crew program, and processing fees for our drug lab, which includes providing access to other courts and agencies to utilize that lab. To talk about some factors that contribute to the reduction in some of our internal inflow regarding the court filing fees is, of course, COVID-19's disruption of the status quo. There's been a lot of changes recently in the court rules regarding ability to pay, basically stating that we are not to just be jailing folks who do not have an ability to pay. So that allows for other means of payment by participating in our work program, our work crew. There are options for credit time served, but we are not focused on jailing folks who do not have the money to pay. There's been a lot of decriminalization of criminal offenses, and most currently the clean slate legislation and the automatic set-aside began just earlier in April, setting aside hundreds of thousands of convictions that are eligible over 7 years old, and that is not contingent on whether they have paid their fines and court costs. We do a lot of work that doesn't necessarily generate the revenue that we talk about or that inflow. We do a lot of record checks. Hundreds come in daily. Our jury process, we're processing 150 jurors a month and prepping for approximately 25 trials a year. With our felony cases, we are spending a significant amount of time or a disproportionate amount of time on felony cases and high court misdemeanors that actually generate the least inflow. So there's a balance there. And there's also, in addition to some of our landlord-tenant hearings, making case flow management take a little bit longer. And of course, that clean slate legislation that we are just getting our feet wet in and kind of navigating that process with courts across the state. A lot of changes in legislation over the last couple years that you can see here with the decriminalization of misdemeanors to civil infractions, citations being issued in lieu of arrest, summons being issued in lieu of warrants, and eliminating license suspensions. And these reforms are really great for folks to continue to be a present and active part of our community by maintaining their jobs, their housing, their employment, their license suspensions. But it also kind of decreases that incentive to pay your fines and fees or even appear at sometimes. So again, we speak to the legislation regarding the clean slate set aside that we are navigating through that process currently. Something to be said about the 61st District Court, or all district courts, is that we're often referred to as the people's court, since most people have contact with the district court than any other court in general. We should not be perceived as a revenue-generating entity, as funding is required by state law, and basically state law does not provide courts with the authority to impose fines and court costs to defendants to fund their operations. State trial court funding is a priority, and really Grand Rapids residents going to court should not face a judge who needs money for the defendant to satisfy any operating expenses. The court impacts the community in significant ways, like we talked about in previous slides regarding our problem-solving courts, alternative sentencing, working with those who are at risk of being unhoused, and our drug lab. And then as a recap, the district court budget revenue is requesting just over $13 million, with the two largest sums coming from the general fund as well as the ARPA grant. Our next slide here comes from the 2020 internal audit that was performed by the city. So we have seen from 2019 to even present, a decline in caseloads. A lot of those factors were outlined in some of the previous slides. 90% of the court's revenue is generated from filing and processing fees, and 80% expenditures are for personnel and building needs. The district courts in Michigan, on average, do receive about 44% of their funding from the local funding units. As of 2020, we were about 45%, and you can see in our slides we're roughly around 46%. To speak to that further, the district court is in line with neighboring courts with similar jurisdictions and populations, Kalamazoo and East Lansing, with our full-time employee count. So, thank you. And to move forward, the 61st District Court is a vital part of our community. It really allows parties to resolve disputes, to be heard, to receive individual justice on individual cases. And we are committing to doing that with dignity and respect for all the citizens of Grand Rapids. Thank you.
All right, Mayor. So that concludes the material that we have. Perhaps it would be good now to go back one section at a time and see if commissioners have any questions for me or the staff.
All right, thank
Start
you,
with
City
fire.
Manager. All right, I know, you want us to go fire, then police, then OPA? Okay, all right, so let's start with fire. Let me get to my fire notes.
Mayor, City Attorney reminded me, there's one other slide, Joel, if you can advance, just real briefly. These are investments that we've been working with from our whole of government approach, and not just from traditional police, fire, EMS response, but DDA has also partnered with the city in helping to engage more private security. We've done that previously with city parks around the city, and specifically due to the staffing issues, the police department have recently supported their contract for enhanced security services. Park and Recreation continues their security contracts throughout various parks of the city. We're also continuing to work with businesses in neighborhoods around SEPTED. We have a position specifically in Planning and Development Department, but as we look at these community efforts, like the Chief mentioned DICE earlier, they're part of this holistic approach to responding, as well as working with our neighborhood associations through some of the federal funding that we receive, and our partnership through the SAFE Task Force to make sure that we collectively have a safe community. So that concludes the materials.
Thank you, City Manager. All right, Chief, I'll get started, and then I'll turn to my colleagues, see if they have questions. So I'll ask them all at once, and you can respond. So I'm looking at your organizational budget, your departmental budget, and I see from 2023 to 2024, pretty significant increase, about $5 million. Is that largely due to the grant and the additional firefighters? Personnel costs?
So the SAFER grant plays into that, but a lot of it was also the contractual increases.
From the contracts?
Yeah, so very little of that increase, we actually have control over.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So it didn't really, other than the additional officers, it didn't
And
necessarily.
even that's grant funded, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our CFO has,
I was just going to say, the SAFER grant's not in there. We'll do a budget amendment when we do decide to deploy that grant. So it's mainly just labor contracts.
Oh, okay. So when will we decide to deploy that grant then?
I
We
believe-
get to decide the start date?
So July 1 is when we're officially raising our staffing by 2 per day, and that's when our reimbursement will start.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll probably do the BA in June. With a lot of our grants, when they're position oriented, we'll do a budget amendment instead of include them in the proposed budget, because sometimes the timing, things like that, or they fall through, like with
So-
our COPS grant for police.
So we're not seeing the SAFER grant in these numbers?
Correct.
So it'll be a little bit less once we get the grant reimbursement?
The appropriation will increase for the amendment, but we will have the reimbursement to offset that cost.
I see.
So, yep.
Okay. Second question, I'm looking at the number of alarms that we responded to. Do we know how many were false alarms? Do you have that broken down?
Yeah, we do. It's in our annual report. So 68% of our alarms are medical, and then we're running 5 to 6% false alarms. So false alarms for us isn't a huge issue downtown. The Prevention Bureau does a very good job being proactive, making sure the systems are working. So my focus really is going to be on bending the curve on those medical emergencies.
Okay, good, that was my
Yeah.
question. I know years ago, the false alarms were quite a bit higher than
Yes.
standard.
Yeah,
and
they've
that was
come in
a
line.
goal.
They've
Okay.
come in line.
Okay, good. And then my last question, and I'll turn to my colleagues, see if they have questions. The community, what'd you call it? The community
Paramedicine.
paramedicine
Yes.
program? Is that similar to the program that you talked about years ago, which was like a community CPR program where you would train residents?
Similar but different.
Okay.
So this is more of a one-on-one where we would partner with GVSU or Michigan State or local hospitals, and we would actually have a medical professional and a firefighter and a social worker. And basically how we're looking at certain groups in the city that have a larger call volume, that's what we would look at for community paramedicine. So it's the diabetic that we go on 4, 5, 6 times in a week. Well, we're not solving the problem, we're shifting the problem to the hospital. And so we would actually take ownership of that, build that relationship, make sure they make their appointments, make sure their prescriptions are filled, make sure they're taking their insulin and eating. And by spending that time on the front end, then we don't send the big red truck on the back end. And so this is a huge shift across the entire country to start doing more proactive medicine.
So it's similar to Tandem 365, right?
Yes.
It's a very similar model.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
So I'm meeting next week actually with a Kim's director.
Oh, good.
And,
Oh, good.
and Life EMS is doing some of this. And again, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We're seeing how we can come alongside these programs in place and expand them.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But
Those are
you-
my questions. Go.
Mayor, if I could add, but it's similar to as well the role of the firefighters on the hot team.
Very similar.
And causing some of the diversionary runs by having trained EMTs on the hot team as well.
Correct. And the biggest thing that we have as the fire department is our relationships with our citizens. And so a lot of times, even though we have a doctor or we have a social worker, the firefighter is the one that's interacting daily and building that relationship. So we would like to take the lead on that and keep that moving forward.
Great, thanks. Commissioner Sassi?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief. My question was around I have 3 questions around the paramedicine. I was wondering if there is a difference with the FUSE program. It's been a while since we've had an update on that. So that sounds like some chronic illness. but I'm guessing some of those folks there, so if you could let me know about that. And then, well, I'll let you answer that, I guess, and then I'll ask the other two.
I am not familiar with the FUSE program.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
but I can tell you that the community paramedicine would center in on chronic illness and people that frequently utilize the
Okay.
911 system.
So for our colleagues who are not familiar with frequent user
Okay.
service, what is it? Frequent user.
Frequent user service. What I know about
know a
it
lot
is
of acronyms up here.
I know, so the DDA helped fund that initially a couple of years ago, and my understanding is it's not
Okay.
fully off the ground or being executed.
Okay. I feel like maybe there were some things last, if we could understand that difference, that would be helpful to know.
Sure.
Mayor, maybe in the next section when Ms. Bohaj is
Maybe
talking
you
to
can
us
speak to
about some of the supportive services, we can address our FUSE efforts.
Thank you. And then on the cadet piece, we were able to, at Public Safety, I think, get a little update in some of our past meetings. And then you talked a little bit about attrition and retirement. So it looks like 18 are going to graduate, but then you got 14 that are going to retire. And I think you mentioned a few who had committed. So what is that commitment rate out of that cadet program?
So we have 4 of the 6 right now that are
Okay.
actually in our hiring process.
Okay.
And so there's a very good likelihood that they will, hopefully make it all the way through.
Okay,
But
so-
that is the whole point of that
One
cadet
has
program.
a good return. So
Yes,
that's something to
absolutely.
continue to keep in mind.
I will note, though, just briefly, so the $100,000 is paying for the cadet salaries, the uniforms, and a little bit of overtime. But we did have to reallocate one full-time person out of suppression to manage that. When we got into it, we realized it's a commitment. And so in order to do this correctly, we have one person overseeing that. So again, by moving that person out of suppression, then that increases my overtime out in the field.
Okay.
So.
This is probably really more of a comment on the emergency management side. I think glad to see that. I don't know about the rest of my colleagues, but a number of questions around what is our response to both what I would call something very specific like train derailments, because we've seen that happen around the country, and then certainly as it relates to any large scale, gun violence, some of these events that unfortunately we continue to see. So I think that's a regular question, so I just want to make that comment. And then the last question I had was with kind of looking at all this asset management, right? Different things that are going to need to be done, different investments. Is there any concern about timing or, like you talked about what you're going to do with Kalamazoo and you're going to have somebody go over here or there. Is there any concern about doing these different upgrades and maybe having any impact to service? Because I think that, when you're making these investments, it's something for the future.
Right.
But it's kind of like when you do things in your home, is there an inconvenience or what are some of the plans for those pieces?
Yes, so
Thanks.
there is a very specific sequence we're looking at, and Kalamazoo took precedence over Division because Division is not going to increase the service. They're simply moving a block south to a new facility. So they will never be out of service. They'll be operating out of that station, and when it's ready, they'll move to the new station. Kalamazoo, we do not have a facility down there, so that is our priority to actually impact the citizens. So we're putting them first, and then we really need to look at the training facility before we construct Division, because I don't know if any of you have been through the what we term as the South Annex, in the Image building that we constructed. That has overflow storage for apparatus, that has our candidate physical agility test, that has our cadet program, and often we have classes running daily down there. So for us to get rid of that facility, we really need to offload those first. So there's a specific sequence that we're looking at.
Thank you, Chief. I have one other comment, Mayor, but I don't think that it's fair to ask you this question. But when we look at all these different capital projects, obviously door replacements, kitchen replacement, facade replacements, just how do we match that up with some of our MLB projects so we can kind of see, okay, what do we need to spend in the city? How do we match that up and then be able to see the impact of, all these, almost a maximizing effect of these capital projects?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if City Manager wants to talk about that. And then I'll turn to Commissioner Moody and then Commissioner O'Connor.
We can cover that in detail in the MLBE section, but it's the same process of getting vendors certified to make sure they're able to perform the work. But a lot of the work in the fire department is performed in-house, correct?
Correct. So there's a few different tiers of work. When we're talking about door replacements, we've done some of that in-house, but we have so many of our steel doors that have rotted off at the bottom. We're literally looking at replacing every steel door in every fire station in the city. At that point, we would reach out to a contractor and certainly work with the MLB program. But the fire department has taken on a lot of the smaller jobs in-house just because we can't get contractors, and frankly, my people do it cheaper and better. So it's been a really good program.
Yeah, thanks. They have many skills over there.
They're handy.
That's right.
They are
We pay them
handy.
with donuts. Commissioner Moody?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Congratulations to you, Chief, once again. I think Commissioner Yasasi asked the two questions I was going to ask, and one was on the recruitment piece, and the other was on the capital project. And I think that both those questions you've answered. So I'm going to pass to the next colleague.
All right, thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner O'Connor and then Commissioner Robbins.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief. Excited to hear about the EM specialist thing. It's, I know that's something I've talked about with you guys for a long time. Just one question, I guess, is just as you think about rolling out that program, one of the things I always worry about it, and you've done such a great job with your capital planning and having things in place so they don't wear out. But when you have a diabetic and you roll a engine out that costs $1.3 million with 3 or 4 personnel on it, that seems to be a waste of reason. I mean, are you thinking about maybe also changing the service delivery model to have some different, maybe less intensive assets that aren't, like a $500,000 truck instead of a $1.7 million fire engine, and maybe be able to run that with fewer crews, or all that stuff? I mean,
Right.
You're probably thinking about that stuff, and I'm just wondering if all that plays in, and that's part of the long-term maybe reimagination of how you deliver the service.
That's a really good question. So we've been down that road on the emergency side, and we had mixed results. Where I would like to stay focused is making sure my big red trucks are ready to go, fully staffed with the personnel, and really focus on the non-emergency prevention side, much like the HOT team. So you're not going to see different size, type, or staff trucks responding to emergencies. We need to make sure we have the right resources at the right time to the right event. However, we can certainly have that red pickup or SUV pull up in a non-emergency setting with a different amount and type of staff. And that's really where I want to focus. Yeah.
Great. And then I imagine at some point you'll roll out just some, again, glad you're buying land in the city to do good things. You'll roll out some potential costs for the 2 stations and your future training planning facility. And
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, sir.
Absolutely.
Along with personnel to staff, the Kalamazoo. Okay.
And equipment.
And equipment. All right. Commissioner Robbins?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Mine's just more of a general question, and I'll probably end up asking both chiefs. But I guess we have a lot of ongoing conversations about larger scale projects downtown with an amphitheater, river restoration. I guess, are there elements of these budgets that are kind of taking into account like an anticipated influx of people, visitors downtown?
So that's a horizon issue. I'll speak for the fire department. I'd really like to get my overtime budget down, which means I need to add staff. However, that staff is to respond to our current risk in the community. And the Kalamazoo project is a prime example. When we combined that station in 1987, that was fine. But since then, the most road miles, the most population, the most taxable value, the infill down there has been tremendous. And so we're no longer able to meet the response times and metrics down there. We're going to experience the same thing in different pockets of the city as we see the large projects in the infill. So as our high rises continue to go up, we're going to have to continue to look at how we staff our downtown companies.
Yeah, but the acceptance of the SAFER grant does give us additional capacity beyond our current authorization.
Correct.
As we anticipate some of the growth.
Yeah. And the department's done a great job, too, of making sure that we have really good river rescue teams and that we're prepared. Obviously, there's dangers in the river now with the dams. The dams are actually really quite dangerous with the velocity of the water, and so we're prepared for that. And
We're meeting tomorrow at Bridge Street Station with the river redesign team to make sure we're up to speed.
great, good. I believe that it'll actually be safer once some of those dangerous dams are removed. So, anyone else have comments before I move to the police? All right. We'll move to Chief Windstrom. And I think I'll get started just with a couple questions. So Chief, a couple things. One, can you remind me, we're still paying a mortgage on the building, right? Do we know when that would be paid off?
I do not,
Go ahead, Chief.
Our CFO maybe?
He does not. I think Molly has the latest estimation on the debt service.
I know we were really close to paying off. We'll double check.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can't remember off the top of our heads.
I remember talking about it last year
Yeah.
and thinking we were close.
Yeah.
So if you could find out,
Okay.
just as we think of facilities in general, and we're doing this facilities master plan, and we know that we're going to have to invest in facilities in the fire department, it'd be really nice to know when some of those projects like the police department that we bought so many years ago will actually be paid off. So
Yeah, and we've been talking about that as, in the analysis of, what do we do with
Capital
these
needs.
buildings? So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then, so Chief, the other question I have, in looking at your overall departmental review overview, so two questions related to staffing. I'm curious when you anticipate that we'll be back to fully staffed. And then, I don't know if this is a question for you or a city manager. I recall last year talking about having, even though it says in here that authorized sworn positions is 304. I thought we had talked about increasing it to be able to plan for attrition and retirements, as well as some of the positions that we agreed to, both either with the COPS grant or with to help staff Mercy Health.
So with the grant acceptance, I believe 304 is the budgeted authorization, but the chief has the ability to hire to 314.
314, okay.
Yeah, so he has additional
I had
capacity.
315 in my head, but, so when do you anticipate with our current efforts that we will get close to being back to fully staffed, which we all know is needed to have 100% coverage throughout the city?
optimistically, it could happen before next summer, but that's with a lot of factors that are outside of our control. Obviously, with the 2 academy classes that are in this proposed fiscal budget for, the budget for the next fiscal year, they wouldn't get us to that number, but we have made improvements at attracting laterals. As well, just the overall budget and what we're seeing is support from the city is attractive to lateral candidates when they see that GRPD is a good place to work, because we have the ability to hire laterals today to cover these spots. We could do it. It's just getting those recruits in from other agencies.
Okay.
So optimistically, it could be as early as before next summer, which is the target I would like to see.
Okay. Oof. I'd like to see sooner. I'm sure you
So would
would
I.
too.
Yeah.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Commissioners, questions for Chief Windstrom? Commissioner Moody?
Thank you, Chief, and thank you for your response to the community as well. You have approximately done 76,000 calls in the city of Grand Rapids. If possible, maybe not now, but later, I would like to know how many of those calls were either false calls, and how many of those calls are predominantly were in the 3rd ward, 1st, and 2nd ward. I'd like to see some kind of data on that if possible, and not just the murder cases, but all cases.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll get those numbers to you.
All right, thank you.
All right, other Commissioner Isasi?
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a few questions. My question was also around the hiring and just kind of looking at, you talked a little bit about the lateral hiring, Chief, and obviously we've got the recruit classes, but I was just looking for some additional updates around EPIC. I know it was sort of identifying technology, maybe using a little bit of this like behavioral economics or gamifying, for people to kind of be able to see what it would look like in Grand Rapids. And that's been, did we do that in the fall that we approved that? I think that item. So I know it takes a little bit of time to onboard. But I had one question, like, how is that going? What are either some things that we didn't anticipate, things that are progressing it further in terms of hiring?
Update on EPIC is it's going great.
Okay.
They flew in town. They interviewed my command staff, some city leaders, some community leaders. did many ride-alongs with the officers to learn the police department. They'll be back very soon to start doing some filming. Talked to, we had our CALIA assessment out, and the leader of the CALIA assessment is from an agency out in Iowa who had Epic do a recruiting campaign for them. She said it worked fantastic. Everything we're seeing is that it's going to be worth the money, but the actual delivery on the product probably won't be until September.
Okay.
As they complete it, but it's on track and moving along very well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. I think, of course, I know we'd all like it to get to that level, but, in the meeting and our public safety last meeting, you were able to share some of the pieces regarding response times. And I think, response times for a concern that a business owner has and to get there in 2 minutes. Thank you for that. And thanks for giving that update. One of the other questions that I had was around, I know you talked a lot about some of the legislative pieces, talking with our Senate Majority Leader Brinks, just sharing either some of the opportunities with MCOLs or other pieces around that. If people are they're going through the police academy, obviously, I don't know what the percentage rate of people who actually complete, but is there anything that we can do to speed up that time, like in the academy, like maybe things that might take a little bit longer that we would have to do? I'm just thinking through like the process improvement piece. Is anything like that being discussed? Is that really not a challenge? But I did want to ask that from.
One of the biggest logistic challenges for us is we are embracing crisis intervention training for all of our officers, and we've got about, I think, 80 or 90 of our department members trained, but it's logistically, it's a heavy lift. It's a 40-hour class. You need to bring civilian individuals from the outside with lived experience to help teach the officers. So we do it in conjunction with other West Michigan agencies. So it's something that I've had discussions with MCOLs and some state legislatures about, of if they could just make that a requirement in the police academy, then we would get these officers already with that training. It would be a huge financial and logistical help to us. So that's one thing we're looking at. Otherwise, there's so much. Yeah, I know MCOLs there's a lot of legislation pending for funding, and the legislature is really focusing on getting good training for the officers. I know they're headed in the right direction. So as far as easy fixes, I'm not aware of any, but looks like they're working in the right direction.
Okay. And then this is just more of a comment. Last week I had the opportunity, thanks to city attorney for pulling it together, to go through a use of force training with the police department. I had done it back in the day when I was on CAB. That was the first board I was on for the city. And I got to team up with Commissioner O'Connor and some of the simulation pieces. And I would say, the training, thank you for putting it together. I'm glad that I went through it. I think the piece that I wanted to bring out here was, it was clear to me that there was a lot of conversation about what I've heard you say, how people want to engage with our police department. What is that going to look like? And one of the most specific pieces was, I think, around just the different techniques for, if somebody maybe is, being apprehended or, has an interaction with the police department. I think talking about what it might have looked like 10 years ago, which was certainly more harmful to somebody who was engaged with the police, but also the police officer. And I think we still have some opportunity to sort of share how that training is going, how that's changing. And so as you two are sitting next to each other, and I know you work together, if there is any opportunity to communicate, I think that would be important. So we had some good discussion around that, city attorney. So yeah, thanks for setting that up. And thanks for the training department for spending that time with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Perdue?
Good morning. So I wanted to piggyback off of the mayor's questions around staffing levels. So where are we currently at?
267 with an authorized strength of 304.
Okay.
That 267 number does not include the 10 individuals that started the academy yesterday and 4 lateral transfers that we have that have to go through a 8-week training program as well.
Okay. And then are there usually, thinking about those classes, those training classes, those recruit classes, is it usually 10 people per class or?
It is 10 people. I have the current director of the academy is a former captain of GRPD, and because of our challenges at staffing, I have reached out to him and said, if we can make it happen, could we increase the next class to 20? And he said they would work with us. So there is an opportunity moving forward to combine those classes and then perhaps look for a budget amendment or something to get us closer to that 304 number.
Okay. I'm asking just because I saw, we approved training dollars last week. I see a few training dollars set aside. So just wondering kind of some of your goals around how many folks you were hoping to go through that training to then join the force. So it sounds like, I think I'm doing the math, about 3 classes, about 30 plus people.
That would
Am I
be
doing that right?
optimum if we could get there, but 20.
That's your request, right, budget-wise?
20.
20, okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. The other question I have, I'm just thinking about the KPIs and your vision around being one of the most trusted police departments. Talk to me about your metrics of success when it comes to trust and the effectiveness of the new training programs that you all both are putting in place.
Yeah, well, that's one of those kind of in policing, like a best sort of thing. You have your crime numbers and you have community trust. And aside from a survey, it's tough to get scientifically reliable metrics on those. So easy metrics would be something like number of complaints to officers or number of sustained complaints. But otherwise, it's really difficult to gauge that truthfully. As you may know, there's a issue that's been discussed many times nationwide in policing is if you put a call out for individuals to discuss policing, there are passionate people on both sides, which will often come, but most of middle-of-the-road individuals who just want good city services will not come out to a police meeting to say, yeah, I think you guys are doing pretty good. So you have the passionate voices from both sides. So gauging that community trust is one of those extremely difficult things in our profession. It's something hard to do. So I would do the complaints, as I see, and then obviously the crime statistics to see from a objective standpoint how we're doing. And then I would really look to this body to say, what are you hearing from your constituents? Because you would have a more direct connection there.
Yeah.
And I'll just add, though, Chief, we do have the National Community Survey that we do, which we will be doing again. And the nice thing about that is it's a standard, reliable, valid survey. But we can also go back and look at feedback from our last 2 surveys and compare improvements in some of the responses
I should not have discounted
the
that,
police
yes, ma'am.
department. So
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, I think I agree that is a bit sticky. How do we get to a fair measurement? And often in these spaces we measure a lot of outputs, like we did this, we provided this, we were at these places, but how do we measure to what end? What is the actual outcome? Did we increase trust amongst who? Was a focus in some of those communities where we need the most trust building done. So I will be interested in kind of continuing that conversation, whether it's through the survey, I think the complaint issue might be a really good metric, but also asking the question around some of the trainings that are being implemented either through OPA or directly through GRPD. How do we measure that those are the right trainings and helping us engage with residents in a better way? So whether that's impressions from officers who go through the course, through community members, I think it's worth thinking more about, especially as we seek to be data-driven and making sure we are building trust in the community in a way that is not entirely subjective, right, to your point around who are you talking to, but kind of a more widespread, reliable way to make sure that we're moving in the right direction.
Thank you, Commissioner. And to your training point, which I don't think addressed, you can really drill down more in the complaints because there is you could say that a police officer was discourteous to you, but you could also say that a police officer used excessive force. So looking at excessive force complaints in the past and then looking at them after we've implemented this new use of force control tactics training would be another metric that we could use.
Yeah, I'd be really interested in seeing some patterns and lessons learned through that data because I think that is such a good measure of how well we're servicing and meeting people's needs and where those complaints, what is the patterns and the bulk of those complaints coming from.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. I know that we didn't talk about it, I think, too much in your section. I think it's in a few other places, just about some of the more proactive measures that we're doing around preventing crime, increasing safety. I think, Brennan, you talked about a number of those. So I think really, really excited to see us invest more and more in prevention and thinking about the other social determinants of health and social determinants of safety that really allow communities to feel and be safe. So thank you.
Yeah.
And if I could just mention, I didn't drill down too much on our data-informed community engagement program, but certainly that's a recognition that it's much better to be talking about stopping a crime before it happens than what do we do after the crime happens to make that arrest. So agreed.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I appreciate you bringing that up, Commissioner, and I appreciate in the budget book on page 41 in the section on public safety, there's a really nice list of other initiatives that the department does, both with the CLEAR program and Boys and Girls Club and Cure Violence and the and the Children's Assessment Center. So there's a pretty nice list. The Clean Slate expungement program that you do with OPA. So if you want to look at some additional details on how much we're spending on those efforts, you can find them in that section of the budget book. So, City Manager, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I was just going to add to the comment and response earlier about the trust level within the community. The National Community Survey also helps us disaggregate those responses geographically by ward as well as by race and ethnicity. And that's what we've, commissioners who were elected prior to this fiscal year, our calendar year, you recall we shared that information within the wards. And so that was our first opportunity to do it on site. And so that was an opportunity not only to quantitatively share it, but also qualitatively to go back in when we talk to residents, is this what you meant? Is this what we're hearing? To kind of reconcile several data points, whether it's trust with the level of safety that's felt within community or trust in terms of the confidence knowing that the officer will both respect the community member and vice versa in any interaction. So we'll make sure that we emphasize that in a future survey.
Yeah, thank you. All right, Commissioners, yep, go ahead.
Sorry, one
Commissioner.
final question. Thank you. Can you talk more about the police critical incident emergency response rescue vehicle? I haven't heard much about that, but I know there's a request in the budget to, I don't know if that's a replacement or a new purchase.
So our current vehicle is, I want to say, about 20 years old, and it recently broke down, so we had to ask the Michigan State Police to cover the entire city for us for the time. It took, I think we had spent $9,000 on repairs, so it's based on a Ford F-350 chassis that I believe it's 20 years old, has lasted quite a bit, but it is a big truck, and I think it was suggested for replacement 3 budgets ago, and it keeps being pushed back. So, yeah, we would like it to get replaced.
Is this the armored truck?
It is bullet resistant, not bulletproof.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chief. Oh, Commissioners, any final questions for Chief? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Similar to my question to Chief Brown, I guess, are there any elements within this budget that are kind of proactively looking at some of those horizon projects and how we can start anticipating the additional needs that those might bring?
The biggest key to our success is the staffing, and what this proposed budget would do is set us up through the recruitment efforts and the overall support that potential recruits would see to be able to fill those positions. And as you said, as the city grows, we will need more police officers. We have far less than I think the national average is 2.3 officers per 1,000 residents. We fall far, far below that. And we definitely need more police officers. And as the city grows, we will need more. But this budget does position us to be able to get there when needed.
Thanks, Chief. All right, I think I'll move on to the next section, and that is our Mr. Brandon Davis from our Office of Oversight and Public Accountability. Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Davis? I'll start down here with Commissioner Moody and then Commissioner O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr. Davis, for your report, and thank you for OPA. I have a question in reference to the Lambert study. I'll wait until they walk out.
While he's doing that, that's our students from our Grow Academy. We'll be talking about them in the next section of the budget, so didn't get a chance to highlight them earlier.
Okay. You were doing a comparison with the 2017 Lambert study, and you were going to be, your group was going to be looking at where that study was at that time versus where the study is today. You're going to show some significant values in reference to, has it changed or is it the same? My question is that there was another Lambert study done as well some time ago. Because I sat on that committee, and that was when we first did the study, a number of us, and I was a part of that, and we asked a lot of questions, and we were very disappointed at the end of that study. So I'd like to know, can you do a comparison with that study as well, or are you just looking at the 17th study?
So, Commissioner, the first study was, the second study really was a follow-up to the first study.
Correct.
Right? So now we're at a point where we're looking at the second study and compared to our current data. Our current plan does not include going back to that first study to compare to that data set. The plan is to look at what is now several years of data and compare that to where we were in 2017, taking into account the feedback that's been received from the police department, from community, and from other entities related to the validity of the 2017 study. The idea is not to simply copy it, but it is to compare the data and the trends that were presented at that point.
Okay, thank you. My second question is in reference to Cure Violence. You developed a great relationship with them, and they are working out of the Grand Rapids Urban League at this point in time. Is there any time in the future that's proposed within this budget as well that we will get an understanding as to what their expenditures are?
Yes, so we plan on doing a full briefing related to Cure Violence in the first quarter of this fiscal year in order for us to move forward with that expansion. So we've been working through all those numbers, which is why they're proposed in the budget in this way, but we anticipate a briefing within the next several months.
Okay, my last question.
Yes, sir.
You are going to be pushing Cure Violence toward the second ward.
Yes,
any
sir.
reason why the first ward is left out?
So the first ward is not left out, but in the participatory budgeting process, funds were specifically allocated by community for an expansion into the second ward. So we're starting with the second ward because community spoke from the second ward saying that they wanted that, and the city manager has instructed us to move forward in that way as it relates to the second ward. But the first ward is not excluded. Our hope long-term is to be able to have Cure Violence operating across the city of Grand Rapids.
Yeah, that's what I was going to add. Once we learn from this process in the second ward, the next step would be to have citywide come back and evaluate the program, but have citywide implementation in the future.
That's correct.
So is Cure Violence being effective in the community?
I believe the answer is yes. We'll be able to speak more to that during the full briefing regarding Cure Violence, but in the last briefing we provided, we were able to present data which shown that Cure Violence has been effective. The thing that's important to remember about Cure Violence, it's a long-term strategy. So when we're dealing with community violence, of course, we want to see quick results. Cure Violence was never intended to be a source that was going to provide quick results. It was about changing norms. In fact, that's one of the prongs. But I would submit to you that we are on track moving forward to change those norms, understanding that it wasn't going to be an overnight reduction that we would see really anywhere across the city as a result of those efforts.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate you saying that. I know when we talked initially about implementing Cure Violence, that was our conversation early on about really needing at a minimum a 3-year commitment, and then coupling that with good data collection. And so that's the work that's being done, and building relationships and trust, as we all know, takes time and is challenging, especially when you're working with individuals who are really vulnerable. So, yeah, thanks. Commissioner O'Connor?
Thank you, Mayor. And I guess my question really just follows up on Commissioner Moody and the city manager's answer about why the second ward and not the first ward as it relates to the Cure Violence stuff. I mean, if I look at neighborhoods of focus, you talked about adding a Spanish language component to it, which I think is great. But then I look at, where I believe a majority of the Spanish language speaking folks in our community live, it's not in the second ward. So it just seemed like there was a bit of a disconnect between, where the problem rises, where I hear, feedback from my constituents on, some of the gang activity that happens in some of the first ward neighborhoods, west of Division and then along the Granville Avenue corridor. And so it was a little, just a bit of a disconnect there. So thank you for the explanation.
I appreciate that, Commissioner. I think it's fair. We continue to have that conversation with the Urban League as well as Cure Violence Global, and the goal is to have cure violence implemented across the city.
Yeah, thank you. All right, other questions or comments? All right, we'll go to Commissioner Sassi, and then we'll see if we can move on to District Court.
Go ahead. Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the update, Brandon. I think you were looking at me when you said I had just given that big update because I had given you the award for the largest presentation of this fiscal year. No, thank you. I think it's good. So I appreciate the update, and, even I've had that question to my colleagues about, certainly always want to advocate for my ward, but how do we use the data pieces? And I do think, we have to recognize people are moving into different parts of the city maybe than they hadn't before because of other things that we'll talk about later around housing. And, unfortunately, we've had a couple of incidents, one just on Leonard Street last year that was, probably not in that vein of cure violence, but was certainly a very disturbing homicide, just involving what I believe was a small altercation, right? But my question was really around that connection point to our educational partners. We just had a meeting maybe not a month ago, a couple weeks ago with the GRPS, our city and school liaison meeting. And I think we also heard at our Kids Speak event a couple weeks ago about just the concerns that young people have, particularly around riding transportation in our community and violence that might occur there, outside of the school hours and things like that. For that youth specialist program, will that role move to different schools? Like what will that look like in terms of engagement? Will they be stationary? If you could talk about that, that'd be great.
Sure. The youth specialist, the idea or the goal behind that position will be able to move from school to school to address violence in schools. One of the things about Cure Violence is it really was not designed for school-age children, right? So the program was really looking at 16 to those mid-20-year-old ages when the program was initially designed. One of the things we saw in Grand Rapids is we really needed to make impact with school-age children in order to stop violence because they were becoming at earlier ages involved in violent behavior. So this youth specialist is something that is not the typical cure violence model, right? So it's a pilot for us. So we're going to learn while we're doing it, but the goal behind it is to have an individual who will be their main focus to go from school to school and address some of those violent issues.
Okay. And one other quick question on the updated traffic stop study. I was on that back in the day. That doesn't seem like that long ago. But you said the data request would begin this month. What's the timeline for completion?
Well, the fellow who has drafted it. It's in my inbox for me to review before we send it to the police department. So honestly, I expect to have it sent sometime this week. But and then once it's sent, the police department will fill it based on their availability to have that filled.
But then to have those research questions asked, what's the timeline for that?
I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question. I anticipate that being it'll be at least a year.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you. All right, Commissioner Perdue?
Yeah, good morning. So Brett, you have 4 people in your department?
So we currently have 3 individuals who are full-time city staff members. Then we have 3 grant-funded positions and a half person as well. So it would be 6.5.
6.5. Okay. I mean, as you briefed us a few weeks ago, and then this, and a lot of the current program, the expansion of programs, and the new programs, I'm wondering, because we talked a lot about personnel today, like how are you and your team getting all this done? I think this work, particularly the proactive work, the targeted work, is really, really important and pairs well with kind of everything we've been talking about public safety. So I guess, I wanted to name that and really, I guess, ask the question back to you of your thoughts around all that you all have on your plate, given the current size of your team.
I appreciate the question. And this year's budget, I did not make a request for additional staff. Last year, Commission was gracious. Now, last year I would have told you, and I think I did say, we needed staff badly. This year we've had the opportunity to begin to grow with the staff that we have. It took us, we're building a department, right? Although we started several years ago, we started from scratch. So we spent a good 6 months really building a team, learning what the work should look like and building to that process. So before I got to a point where I was requesting additional staff, I wanted to make sure we were fully functional with the staff we have. And I do feel comfortable at this point with the staff that we have. From a Horizon perspective, perspective, I did mention that those grant-funded positions are going to run out, and that would be a concern for me. As we move forward and as these other programs come on board, if we get to a point where we need additional staff, I would definitely make my request to the city manager.
Well, I just want to thank you and all three of you really for utilizing grants and outside funding to really boost your efforts and allow our city dollars to go a little bit further. So
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, agreed. All right, I think I'm going to move on to district court then. Commissioners, I think I'll start. Thanks for the presentation. I appreciate the work of the court, although I say this every year. I'm pretty frustrated that the subsidy from the general fund continues to grow. I was looking back from when I first started around this table, and it was less than 3 million, and now it's approaching 10 million if you take general fund and ARPA dollars. Obviously, the general funds are precious dollars that we have flexibility to use, but not when we're mandated by state law to subsidize district court. I'm looking at the numbers, and I guess one concrete question I have is, you mentioned that there's a decline in cases, and yet the expenditures in the department continues to go up. So you don't see kind of this correlation between a decline in cases and size or scope of the at least the revenues and expenditures
Sure.
needed for the court. So can you talk about that a little bit? I know we've talked about it in the past again around this table, that as there has been decriminalization and some of the changes at the state law, especially around corrections reform and expungement, we had hoped years ago when this body supported decriminalization of marijuana that there'd be a reduction in cases that would be coupled with a reduction in the services and cost of the district court.
Sure.
So can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also, just so you know, I have somebody here, being here on behalf of Tanya Todd, I have somebody from our finance department here with me to answer some of those questions from previously not being here for some of those past budgets.
thanks.
But yes, cases have declined, and I think the numbers that I had on here were originally from like 2009 to 2019. And we've seen that staff has also declined with that over the last several years, and I do have some numbers on that for staff, and I don't know, Dan, if you have that ready handy. But cases do decline. Let's see, I think our stats were back from 2009, but this starts at 2010, where we had 92 staff members, and we're currently down to 88 staff members. 83, sorry, the numbers are off on here. 83 staff members. I think despite cases not coming in as they used to over the last 10 years, the work still doesn't go away. And I know we talked a little bit about some of the projects that we handle in-house that don't generate any of that inflow or that revenue as we talk about. And even in that 2020 internal audit, I think it was noted that we should be at, I think it was 70 or 74 employees, and we're currently sitting at 68 full-time employees. And maybe Dan can speak to the numbers a little bit more, but the work doesn't go away, and the requirement to provide justice for the community doesn't go away, despite some of those case counts going down. Because of the change in legislation, those projects have really increased.
Yeah, and I think, I know you haven't been here in the past to hear some of this conversation. I think for me, the frustration has been that there continues to be state law that changes, but there's not funding to support the changes. And we have talked at length for years about the need to change court funding at the state level. Studies have been done, recommendations have been made, nothing has been moved.
Right.
And so more and more of the responsibility of the court that the state mandates us to fund
Right.
falls on our general tax dollars and our taxpayers in our community, even though a very small segment of our residents actually use district court.
Sure.
Unlike many of our other services like public safety and parks, which are used by a much larger percentage of our general population. And so that's just I know you can't solve this. I'm saying this for my colleagues that haven't been around this table over the last several years who have heard this conversation. And then just a reminder to, I saw Karen in the back, to our government affairs person. that we need to continue to make this a priority when we go to the state and ask for legislative changes.
And you're not wrong. There are a lot of conversations at the state level. They created that task force, I think, back in 2019 about alternatives to court funding and should it be at the state level. And I know those conversations are still happening, even though I personally am not a part of those, necessarily out in Lansing. But they are looking at those changes, understanding that there is a lot of tough conversations at the local level about funding and where it's coming from and the effects of that. And, we're hopeful to see some changes too, to kind of build on the relationships and the budget. But you're right, it's not anything that we can change. We just know that it's imperative to have a consistent and strong funding unit to separate our trial court judges from having to make decisions and sentence individuals to fines and fees to fund our units. So although we understand the argument, it is very important and we sympathize, but we hope to see change as well.
Yeah, thanks. Commissioner.
Thank you, Mayor. And again, I know you can't impact this, but I'm struggling because I look at the proposed budget. You had $600,000 in ARPA funds last year to supplement the court. There's a proposal for $2.5 million in ARPA funds this year to support the court. There's $2.9 million, proposed, which again, I don't get to say whether or not those 2.9 are gonna go next year to support the court. And then those funds are gone. And then I look at, historically speaking, we've been around this $7 million subsidy, $6 million general fund, $1.2 million for capital expenditures, so just over $7 million subsidy to the court. But then if you factor in the $2.5 million of ARPA funds this year, that, again, those are one-time funds, those disappear. So really, the subsidy's closer to $10 million this year, maybe $11 million next year. So those dry up in '26. Then I'm on the hook for $3 million more from the, and again, I'm gone. I don't, that's something my colleagues are going to have to struggle with, not me. But I still don't want to see $3 million of taxpayer dollar that increase, right? So why in this cycle, when we've been at a pretty steady continuum of $7 million subsidy, this year it's really a $10 million subsidy, if we're being honest with ourselves. And then, you look in the out years to '26 when the bonds are gone, that really only saves, $1.1 million in savings. So there's $1 million that comes off the books in '26 when the ARPA funds are probably dried up, but there's still a delta there of, $1.8, $1.9 million. Yeah, why is the budget jump? It's really a $3 million increase this year, if we're being honest with ourselves. And if there's $2.5 million of ARPA funds, I would really hope that the general fund operating subsidy from the city of Grand Rapids would have been reduced $2.5 million. But instead, we're spending $10 million in 2024. So that's to me, that's not acceptable. And again, I've said this before, the state can have the court back. I'm happy to let it go into receivership, and I know there's all kinds of implications with that, but this, at some point, someone has to put a flag in the ground and say, this is unacceptable. Delivering justice is great. And again, you're not doing this, but delivering justice is great when it's done fairly, and there are court systems like some of our suburban courts that actually are revenue generating. So the system is there's no parity in the system, and it feels like there's a lot of protectionist stuff getting played out, and people just want to protect their jobs and their employment. And I want quality judges, and I want quality clerks and quality magistrates, and I want justice to be delivered effectively and fairly. But I also want it to be done equitably, and it feels like the city of Grand Rapids, my taxpayers are burdened more than taxpayers in other communities for this, and that's not fair.
Yeah,
So-
and I appreciate the percentages that you provided, but if you really calculate all of that, we're really subsidizing the district court closer to 80%, 75%. I mean, 10 million out of a $13.5 million budget. It's the largest percentage I've ever seen, and I know that the pandemic impacted that. But I think Commissioner O'Connor makes an excellent point.
Sure. I was just going to jump in and say, when we were shaping together the general fund budget, particularly coming out of the pandemic, then when we got ARPA, we thought, let's hold the subsidy stable so we can stabilize the rest of the general fund with funding. And we have this tool, ARPA. So realistically, yeah, that subsidy would have climbed, but we just chose to structure it this way. I think from a legislative perspective, that Karin can speak to in Lansing is look, we're already paying this much. We're having to subsidize with our relief dollars that could have been used for, we're using them for revenue recovery instead of investment in some of our other really great programs that would have helped our community. So that was just a choice of funding structure there.
Mayor.
Well, not to harp on this anymore, but, I look at those numbers and I look at, $7 million could go to the fire department capital. Over 3 years, that's $21 million. As we look at all of our needs, I continue to say that this is something that we have to
It's a
solve.
huge problem. That's why we highlighted it last week in our presentation as well. So.
Mayor, if I could. So
Go ahead.
this is, appreciate it's not really much of a question. It's the continued frustration that's been voiced. And those are hard conversations we had during the budget process. And what the answer is really, we should not have been the only ones using relief money to subsidize municipal court or district courts. That there should have been additional relief provided from the state to help in this effort to ensure that we could continue to have fair and equal access to procedural justice for our residents. We speak of this investment as a cost burden to the general fund, which it is. But what I realized recently, we've not spoken to it as an equity investment. When we talk about the $49 million that we spend in this budget, and I just confirmed this yesterday, to advance equity, this over $8 million subsidy is not included. So it's really almost $57 million because the majority of the people, and we checked the numbers yesterday, over 40% of the people who use the court are African American solely. So if that, and what we discuss is if there was no local relief efforts and if we were depending on the revenue sources to either have more court hearings or citations, we'd be reversing the effect of what Mr. Davis just spoke about with the traffic study and trying to reduce the number of incidents in which people of color are disproportionately impacted. So from a fiscal aspect, it is absolutely a drain on the general fund, and we could be using those funds for other purposes. And we have the benefit of using ARPA to do it. Now, if the general fund was not in a good condition, we certainly would have prioritized more relief to the general fund, but because we could have, we chose to do that. I think to your point, we need to really press for some urgent reconsideration because we can do it this year. There's no guarantee, to Commissioner O'Connor's point, that we could do it the next year or have a double, almost twice the increased amount once the ARPA funds runs out. So I appreciate that. I'm not hoping for a Dias amendment to the budget expenditures this year like previous years, but if we could do that, I would be more than happy to not use an ARPA supplementation for the future years. So we'll take that under advisement.
Yeah. Well, and City Manager, I want to be clear, and I want our friends over at the district court to know this. It's not that I don't appreciate the service. Right. I mean, the service is absolutely, they support an important population within our community, and the court does great work. I continue to be frustrated with the funding mechanism, and there are cities, it's broken, we've known it's broken for a long time, and there are other cities where the district court is a part of the county and the circuit court, and it's a braided funding where the courts have shared revenues. There's also cities that have courts that are managed by the state. So there are different structures based on the designation of the type of court. And again, you look at some of the other communities, and they don't run this kind of deficit for their district court. It's just not a fair funding structure and formula when you look across the entire state. There are lots of other cities that do not subsidize their district court to the level that we do. And so I think that, to me, is what is most frustrating. As we look at all of these other enhanced services that we want to provide citywide, our opportunities to do that are limited when you look at requirements that we have with different pots of money within our general fund. So I just want to be clear. I'm not saying that the services aren't really important services. I continue to be frustrated with the funding mechanism.
I understand that, and to speak to just the internal revenue piece, I can't speak to all the other jurisdictions in the state, but here in the city of Grand Rapids, we have a very large indigent population. So bringing in internal revenue or internal flow of any kind of funds is difficult, but rightfully so in the community that we're serving. So I understand your argument. I appreciate your comments and.
Yeah, thanks. Commissioners, any final questions or comments? Commissioner?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I just had one question. Again, I know you're just the messenger, but I do appreciate the two comparison points with the other courts. I'd be interested to see, I guess, what the other, outside of just those two, what the percentage looks like. And then I guess kind of my part two question is our court the only one that's experiencing the large increases, or is this, I mean, I understand the system is not ideal. Are they also kind of experiencing commensurate increases there as well?
Sure, I can tell you this. I don't have any numbers in front of me as far as like what the other courts' budgets look like or what it looks like and what's being supplemented from their local funding sources. And I can get that for you and get that back here. But the issue of funding is not unique to Grand Rapids. It's not even unique to the state of Michigan. So I recently saw a graph that I believe half of the nation is solely funded by states. The other one there are partial local, partial state funding. So we're not unique to this. I can't quote anybody in the problems that they're seeing. I can absolutely reach out to some of our partners statewide at the administrative level asking those questions, but we are definitely not unique to this in these tough conversations at the local funding units.
Thank you.
Here, we'll get the information from the 2019 study. I think the comptroller helped us with that audit and see if we can refresh those budget numbers and benchmark comparisons.
All right, thank you. All right, final question, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, just final comment. I think this is a really great example of some of the financial implications of equity-based decisions, right? So outside of the flawed funding mechanism in general, often when you make progress in one lane, it has an impact elsewhere. You know, if you prevent preterm births, you're going to lose money in your NICU. If we prevent or we decriminalize certain offenses, which we should, we're going to see less fines and fees, so on and so forth. So I think this has to be part of the conversation. There has to be some appetite for that if we really are going to be focused on equity and making sure that we're serving all of our residents.
Yeah, thanks. All right, thank you all. Appreciate the information. We'll turn it over to City Manager to go on to our next topic, which is economic prosperity and affordability.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the Commission. So moving on to our next strategic priority area of economic prosperity and affordability. You'll see here on the screen some totals of the budget in this investment area. I do want to flag for you that there will be a future budget presentation as part of this process about the special districts and authorities portion of that. So we'll be focusing on other parts of EPA today. And just a reminder for you all about the objectives of this particular focus area as we move into more specificity about the investments that are included in the manager's preliminary budget. So we want to set a little bit of context about where we stand with the Grand Rapids local economy and some things that are on the horizon that were top of mind as this budget was put together. So you have on your screen here a lot of strong indicators for what we know about Grand Rapids and West Michigan. It tends to perform well. It can tend to perform better than the region and the state and at sometimes the national level. And that's certainly being borne out here with some of the statistics that we're seeing. But we don't obviously want to declare victory and say that this is not the result of a lot of effort and investment, and that continuation of those efforts are necessary to make sure that we continue to see this sort of success. We also know that there are sectors of our economy that are not faring as well as we would like to see, not coming back maybe from the pandemic in a way that we've yet adapted to allow everybody to be successful with some of the changing opportunities and ways that people are behaving, including working from home more often, which is still impacting some of our office and small retail businesses. We also know that there are our own residents that are not yet able to take advantage of all of the opportunities that some of our economic success provides. So we will continue to invest in ensuring equitable access to that opportunity. So taking a look, overview of the budget in this area, we have sort of divided this into areas where we're continuing our level of effort, and then few places where we are enhancing our services. So I'm going to focus in on the continuity of services first. So here, with respect to housing and homelessness, obviously housing continues to be a significant need, all unit types, all affordability levels, and we are continuing the traditional programs that we have had to support unit creation and services to support people remaining stably housed. So we continue our federal grant programs. You very recently received a presentation from Connie Bohatch about this year's process. Fiscal year 2024, we are anticipating about $7.6 million to flow to us through those federal grant programs. Obviously, that can change as the federal fiscal year, slightly different than our fiscal year, but that's what we're anticipating now. We also And those funds are channeled into a number of projects, including shelters and emergency solutions, for rapid rehousing, as well as unit creation at affordable levels throughout the community. We also are continuing our investments in stability services and homelessness response. So you see there on the right hand of that column is about $830,000 worth of investment. Again, continuing on in efforts that you are familiar with from past budget cycles, including eviction prevention program through the district court, and as well as some of our staff positions that support homelessness response and outreach, as well as housing work that we're doing at the city. I will flag that we are continuing the personal belongings storage program that we have done over the past couple years that supports some key initiatives, particularly downtown, that remain important to the community. Moving on to some other investment areas, we are continuing the investment in the cannabis industry and the objectives that were outlined by the commission as cannabis became legal in this community with our cannabis program manager, and working with the industry to ensure that they are successfully able to complete the commitments that they made at the time of permitting. We also are continuing our level of support through community development services for a lot of neighborhood programs. So some of the federal funding that we just spoke about is channeled into neighborhood organizations to do both outreach and education. And you see there on the screen some of the efforts that are supported in building community awareness and a sense of belonging. We also work with 12 neighborhood organizations to support public safety activities, including violence reduction, and those kinds of investments and neighborhood capacity building will continue in this budget. Also want to ensure that and I'll dive a little deeper into this in future slides, we are continuing our support for the Smart Zone efforts. That's an effort focused particularly on the technology sector and growing that sector, which is an important one here and performing well in Grand Rapids. Now moving on to some of those budget enhancements that I referenced. So while we continue our traditional support for housing and housing stability services, we know that the need is significant and continues to grow for more housing units in particular. The Commission received a presentation from Housing Next on April 11th about how that need has grown just over the last several years and was made aware of the current need at about 14,000 units in the city of Grand Rapids by 2027. So in recognition of that, this budget includes additional investment in the Affordable Housing Fund of $1.5 million of ARPA dollars. I also do want to flag that we anticipate additional funds flowing into the Affordable Housing Fund from the sale of 201 Market. We anticipate that sale to close either at the very end of fiscal year 2023 or very early in fiscal year 2024. We are currently working with our partners on a June 30th closing. And a portion of the proceeds of that sale is earmarked to go into the Affordable Housing Fund. So potential for some significant additional unit support through that investment. We also are continuing other economic support for a number of projects that we anticipate, including housing units through the additional RAP Revitalization and Placemaking Grant Program. A little bit more detail on that in a future slide. I also want to highlight here, although it's not detailed on the screen, conversation that we had with the Public Safety Committee last month, that we anticipate continuing to show our support for and investment in support for housing stability services in particular. And a little bit to Commissioner Yasasi's question, there has been iteration on this idea of frequent users. So frequent user service enhancement is a term that's used slightly differently in different communities, and it can mean a number of things. But in Grand Rapids, we've tended to focus on support for folks that are falling through gaps of the system and therefore heavy users of either emergency medical services, emergency mental health services, sometimes law enforcement services, and looking at root causes for that and trying to disrupt that process. So there was some work done back prior to the pandemic. That work has sort of iterated with all of our community partners, and there is now focus, as the Public Safety Committee heard a little bit about from Courtney Myers-Keaton, the director of our Continuum of Care, on developing a by-name list that allows for cross-agency conversations about some of those frequent users, what are their needs, who's meeting those needs. That sort of information sharing is happening on a much more routine basis now, and there are protocols around that. We also talked about and continue to develop some work around while that work is underway and the root cause work is underway and work to find permanent housing for some of those folks continues. The time it takes to get into permanent housing is still longer than anybody would like. So we're looking at solutions for that bridge housing. So in between now, when someone is unhoused and when a permanent unit may become available, how can we leverage the relationships that are built through our street outreach programs to get folks into some sort of, and I'm not using a term of art here, so I will call it bridge housing, that they can temporarily be in and be safer than living out on the street. So that work continues. Our investment is reflected not only in some of those budget numbers that I provided, but also a significant amount of staff time and resource. Moving on from there, I'm just highlighting a couple of other enhanced services across a lot of city services and efforts. I'll flag here Art Prize 2.0 continues to be an enhanced investment, both of funds and staff time, to support that new partnership that was created this year between DGRI, the city, and Kendall College to not only keep but enhance and adapt this signature event for the city and continue for that to be something that really draws a lot of visitors to Grand Rapids to the benefit of the whole community. Also some other investments around a number of our services. I'll talk a little bit more in a future slide about some of our planning and development center investments. So I'll flag here just the continued investment in some entrepreneurship. So this new community transformation fund is a similar sort of idea to Smart Zone, making access to capital for businesses that can have a harder time making those connections, but it goes well beyond the tech sector. So an opportunity to look at something innovative there. capital investments that support some of our economic prosperity and affordability investments continue on a number of the significant projects that have been the focus of this commission for several years. So we will be providing more detail about the parks and trails focused parts of those investments in the May 9th workshop when we talk more specifically about parks, but certainly they do have an economic benefit as well. So we've talked about some of those here. I also want to note there's a significant investment here noted for Calder Plaza. That's a little bit of a two-year, multi-year project of accumulating funds. So in fiscal year 2024, the work that will be happening on Calder Plaza is some pretty routine maintenance work. But this $5 million investment includes funds that are going to be building over a couple years and supplemented by the county to do the full replacement of the deck of Calder Plaza. So that's anticipated as early as fiscal year 25. So that's why that number is pretty high. So I just wanted to flag that. Looking a little bit more in depth on some of our sort of economic and equity objectives where some of those values and priorities sort of intersect in this outcome area, we wanted to share a little bit of information about our progress to date on some of our MLBE, micro local business efforts, and inclusion plan outcomes. So obviously, we have focused quite a bit on the construction sector in this regard. So the Economic Development Department, through incentive programs, has an inclusion plan and works very hard with folks that receive incentives from the City of Grand Rapids to utilize micro-local businesses as part of those construction projects. We also, through our Equal Business Opportunity Program, have been supporting the growth of this sector. So helping micro-local businesses get certified, growing that particular part of the construction sector. It's important that we continue to focus on that, and you'll see on this slide the success of some of those efforts in terms of growing the number of registered MLBEs in the city. But it's important to continue to focus on that sector of the economy. There's a lot of opportunity that remains. We're a very fast-growing city. We have a lot of housing needs. We have a lot of ARPA dollars that are going to be channeled into capital projects, and so it represents real opportunity not only for businesses and small businesses to be able to scale up, but to support good paying jobs and the ability to have access to good high paying jobs for all in our community. And we'll continue those partnerships there with the partners on the screen to help on both sides of that equation. So help access to good jobs and continued growth of those businesses. Jeremiah Gracia reported out on some of this in some of his annual report, but I did want to flag here, just we continue to hold ourselves accountable to targets here. So we are close to the target that we had set for the value of MLBE contracts secured, but we continue to push to get to 100% of our target. And this budget continues those investments. So investments in our partnerships with organizations like Builders Exchange, et cetera, as well as our River for All position that is really focused on ensuring that the work in and around the river does really grow the economy in an equitable way. A little bit of a deeper dive on the continued support for placemaking grants that came through the state with RAP 2.0. So on the screen there is the schedule for that second round. Just as a reminder, in RAP 1.0, City of Grand Rapids projects run through the Economic Development Department, value at about $9.4 million. The commission approved the distribution of those funds. We're currently working with all of the recipients for individual funding agreements. Given the timing of RAP 2.0, there will be a lot of work in fiscal year 2024 supporting not only finalizing those funding agreements, but then doing the work of monitoring and reporting out on the use of those ARPA dollars. So significant, again, opportunities within our community to achieve many of our objectives. Then a little bit more, as I promised, about the planning and development investments in this budget. So again, growth development private and public development is an engine in the economy. It's very important that we continue to invest in this particular set of services for the city. It's important for that sector that our timelines are predictable, that our code is understandable, that we have staff available to help people navigate the process in timelines that are reasonable and predictable. So this budget supports one new position in the Development Services Group. That is intended to not only help reduce some of the timelines for review as we continue to have sort of record-setting volume of permits and value of permits, but also to give back a little time for our staff to be more in a problem-solving mode. So when you have a lot of permits and you have a lot of time pressure, it can be very natural to be head down, this doesn't meet code, here it is, developer, go back and find the solution. And with a little bit more time and flexibility, our staff will be able to be in a little bit of a creative problem-solving mode as well, which is something that we hear from folks that would be valuable. I also want to highlight our investment in Develop With Us, which is a program that is, again, important for the community. So as change happens faster and the magnitude of change is bigger, we see bigger projects in neighborhoods in terms of unit density and other things. The community can sometimes feel like, hey, wait a second, I'm not sure what's happening. I'm not sure how I'm involved in this. I'm not sure this is meeting my needs. So obviously there's the community master planning process. That is sort of big picture. How are you influencing what's happening in your neighborhood? But engaging at the project level is another very important way to get that sort of community and neighborhood buy-in and that neighborhood feedback to a developer about what is the community really looking for with respect to a particular development. So Develop With Us is a program that will allow us to have that sort of more robust engagement. We think at about 6 projects, and it will allow us to not only push out information in different ways than the traditional noticing requirements in the code, but will also allow us to engage with the neighborhoods in less traditional ways and places that allow us to get that more robust feedback to the developer and into the process. Also, we are continuing the multi-year investment in the Community Master Plan, and fiscal year 2024 is when we anticipate the Planning Commission and the City Commission approving final policies. So with that, we're moving on to special events. Again, another very robust part of our economic development strategy is drawing folks into this community from outside, but also creating a lot of exciting opportunities for our own residents to partake in arts and cultural events. We are, as you see on this graph, above pre-pandemic levels. We were at the end of fiscal year 2022 above pre-pandemic levels of visitors and events. We expect to be on pace with that as we conclude fiscal year 2023 as well. As noted, though, at the outset, we can't say, hey, we're back, we don't need to invest in this particular area anymore from a staff perspective. So we are continuing and enhancing our investment in special events, continuing the ability for equitable access to events. So we have our city sponsorship program. I'll move on, sorry. City sponsorship program that allows us to support grassroots events. It's not always practical or possible for all of those community partners out there that would like to hold special events to get the kind of traditional big ticket sponsorships from private organizations. And so this, we believe, supports our goals of equitable access to those sorts of event sponsorship. We are also investing in the infrastructure here, so we do make equipment available for these special events, and we're replacing some of that equipment to make sure that we're continuing to have high quality things available to folks that are sponsoring special events in our community. Little bit deeper dive on the tech sector in particular. If you saw it on one of my opening slides, this is an area that is growing faster in Grand Rapids than it is nationally. So, and it's an important sector that draws good jobs to the region. And so we're continuing our investment in the Smart Zone contract. That's a partnership of Spartan Nash and Start Garden. It's in its 3rd year with fiscal year 2024's budget. And it allows for, again, the ability to support those kinds of tech startup businesses to be positioned very well to get first and second round funding and really take off and grow in our community. We also are continuing on the sort of job readiness side of things with the youth in our community through continued investment in the Grow 1000 program, both the kind of teen employment summer program and the Grow 1000 Academy that is for youth age 18 to 24 and provides a more robust opportunity for professional development. I just want to highlight a couple of the enhancements that are included in the 2024 program. And remember, because of where this falls in the summer, this straddles the fiscal year 2023 and fiscal year 2024. But there are some enhancements we're making, including increasing the hourly wages and increasing some supports for the employers themselves so that they can have a successful experience within their businesses with this youth employment program. That concludes the EPA overview. Mayor, I'll turn it back to you for
Mayor,
questions.
should we pause here, or do you want to get through the rest of the brief material before you leave at 11:30?
I think we should pause on this section and do questions. And then, yeah, that's what I think we should do.
All right.
All right, commissioners, questions on this section? Go ahead, Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just one question as it relates to the cannabis stuff. I think one thing that has been missing from the conversation is just an update on cannabis revenue. I know that there's some state sharing payments that come in that we have not received any that I know of to this point. So I'm just wondering what, if there's an update on when those funds will be arriving and how much we'll be getting and, all that good jazz.
So we'll get specific projections on revenue. I think what we have in this budget is just the $50,000 we've been accumulating or allocating over the past 3 years for the social justice fund and then the position that's funded. But all the other revenue we were estimating would be to help with other general fund expenses, just in general.
The total amount, we're rated almost at $600,000 a year for that.
When does that, is that an annual payment from the state? Is that how does that, I guess I still don't understand how that works because I think we weren't off the ground when the first cycle of payments came from the state. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around when do those payments come?
Annually in March.
Okay.
Yep.
So we did get a payment this year.
Yes.
Okay. And what can we spend those dollars on?
What's that?
What can we spend those dollars on?
It's pretty
just
open. I can see if there's specific, but as I understand it, we're allowed to receive it directly in our general fund.
I know that there were public safety dollars allocated, but those unfortunately went to the county. And as we well know, the county doesn't do anything related to cannabis governance in the city. So, again, the state structure I don't think is set up quite how we had all hoped it would work. But $600,000 is better than nothing.
Yeah, and I think if I remember right, when we talked about the potential for those dollars, it would support some of the work that we currently are doing around SEPTED and some of the planning work that's being done. So I have a question. I'm glad you touched on housing. I really appreciate all the work that's being done around housing and homelessness, and I see Ms. Bohatch in the audience. Really appreciate your leadership in this space, as well as yours, Ms. Behrens, with the COC. I'm looking in the budget book at page 309. It has a list of all the housing projects. And I'm just curious if we have a list of, for the projects coming that are in process for this year, when those, so one, have they been started? I see a couple of them on the list that I know have been stalled because they haven't been able to make, probably for a whole host of reasons. Some of them, obviously, there was some gap funding with RAP or the Affordable Housing Fund. Can we just get a list of, maybe just in addition to the list, or add a column to say when we anticipate that they'll be finished and available to the community? There's a lot in the pipeline.
You're specifically referring to the ones that are labeled in process, Mayor?
Yeah, it would be nice for us to know when those are made available, especially I'm looking through the list, and there's a number of permanent supportive housing, projects for individuals experiencing homelessness and seniors. We know that that's a huge need in our community, and I think it would be helpful for all of us to know when those units will be made available, just to help us get a good sense of the pipeline. Commissioner?
Yeah, and I just also want to touch on, I saw that they were adding an additional FTE to the planning department for construction planning and permitting, and I want to say I appreciate that. I know it's one of the things I hear from a lot of folks who operate in a variety of communities, and just the pace at which Grand Rapids approves projects is often frustrating compared to some of our neighbor communities that we're competing against. So I appreciate that investment and hope that helps alleviate some of those concerns.
Yeah, I agree. I'm supportive of that addition and just want to make sure that we're continued to be focused on not just the front-end permitting and approval, but also the inspection component and making sure that there's alignment. We've heard from developers, as you know, who get the pre-approval, feel like they're on the right path, and then they get stuck with some changes that are required based on inspections. So, other questions and comments about this section, Commissioner Sassi?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the presentation, Ms. Behrens. I just had a couple of questions. I feel like we have talked a lot about housing, so thanks for that update. I feel like, so some of this we just most recently talked, so I don't have as many questions in that area, but for the Smart Zone piece, do we know the timing when, I think they're going to release MEDC, the Smart Zone and micro business, some other next wave of grant funding? I thought that might be in the next month or so.
I'm going to phone a friend and see if Mr. Gracia can answer that question.
Okay.
I do not have that answer.
Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. So there's been discussions, there's been a few webinars and discussions roughly the summertime with a fall awards, but that's a moving target. But we have been tracking that very closely with the MEDC Smart Zone staff.
I was just wondering how we can match that up. I think at the overview, City Manager, you talked about that we are able to do the small business assistance, which I think we had to confirm that. We didn't know, and now we're able to have that this year.
1.5 million in ARPA
I was going to say 1.2, but.
1.5, I think.
So just wondering how we can potentially, try to maximize or connect those, different sources of funds. So I don't expect a lengthy answer, Mr. Gracia, thanks. But thanks for that, phone a friend. One, thank you for the detail about the RAP projects and for that detailed email, City Manager. And I know there's a lot of other information here, so I think it's really clear how we'll prioritize that piece. I think that's helpful. With the investment in the public museum, I think the renderings and the conversations with them all sounds really exciting, a lot more activation in that part of our city. Do we know, I know that there will be some incubation spaces. I think there's going to be a commercial kitchen. Are we at the point where we're having conversations about how we might, again, try to connect some of the investments that we're doing, businesses that we're working with, individuals that our retail specialist is working with to, anecdotally, I know of one business that had to close sort of a little bit after pandemic, and I know our retail specialist has been working with this individual. They've just been unable to find a new location that fits their needs for their business. So I'm interested to see if we're at that point, and not only in our investment, but how we might co-create that space together.
In the Grand Rapids Public Museum?
Yes.
We can bring back additional detail on that investment as part of the workshop on May 9th. That is fully designed and permitted.
Okay.
So we'll talk about how the tenant spaces, if there are any, are being filled. We'll be prepared to talk about that next time.
But just for clarification, that's both for their capital plan for the facility as well as the trail portion that connects, and our investment is a small portion of their master plan effort.
Okay. Yeah.
It's overall, what, $64 million? Overall, I believe, is their total.
Between
development.
multiple phases, correct?
Yeah.
And this investment is for the first phase.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks for highlighting all the pieces around sort of our corridor improvement authorities. I think, it's always great to be able to see these large projects, but then see what's happening in our different neighborhoods. I'm glad that we have that balance and focus. As we think about those small business supports for the North Corridor Improvement Authority that I'm on, that's hard to say. I think we're trying to understand, are people not applying for some facade pieces because they're not able to outlay the money? So I remember I asked this question last year. I'm going to ask that question again. As we look at that, are there some ways to activate more of that? Is that maybe just in our area because that's something new that we're doing, or,
Yeah, I understand your question. So at this point, the last couple of years, that has been a point of focus, and almost all but one, I think it's Uptown, has removed any matching requirements for the facade, which has resulted in, as you saw last year, over $400 and some thousand of the almost $1 million in facade. So they removed that barrier, and actually Southtown was the first to do that probably 2 years ago. And so that barrier has been removed in terms of any matching requirement for the facade grants. And in fact, I know that the South Division CIA recently increased their facade program to up to $20,000 for projects that are over a certain limit. So we've been stressing to them and empowering them to use that dollars to directly invest into those businesses, and they've done so with policy changes and making sure that they're getting that money out the door. And we saw the results of last year. And again, it was like a 40% increase in their expenses or their investments year over year.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I think it's good to see the strategic partners that we have for MLBE growth. I think that certainly not an expert in this area, but as I spend more time with our small businesses, there are so many small businesses who are individually also doing this outreach, as part of their business that they have. They feel very compelled to support other business owners in that support. So as we continue on the strategic partner piece, I would like us to see if there's something that we can do for individuals. Maybe they're not part of an organization, but they're a business who might be doing some of this outreach or connection point. I've continued to hear that from a couple of individuals. Like maybe they're not associated with an organization, but they've brought some business owners together. So more of a comment.
Thank you.
And then I think I have one last question, Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, no, two. So for the Community Transformation Fund, so this is saying it's for later stage tech companies. With the fund, I feel like I've had a couple of updates about it, but are the dollars also, are we encouraging people to come into the city to be in our area? Is that one of the strategic focuses of the fund as well?
Yep, my understanding it's for both local and other investors and businesses who want to come into our community. And so this is for stage 2 companies, and I think the ask was significantly more than what we've allocated in the budget, but we thought since we were encouraging people to invest in Grand Rapids, that the city of Grand Rapids ought to be part of the investors as well.
Yeah, in addition to that, any investment they make, the business is required to establish their office in Grand Rapids. So they've done those already, a couple of those that moved from out of state. There's a continued conversation about it, continue to identify even the local folks too. But they're always focused on those underserved, underrepresented entrepreneurs.
So that's good to know. So even with that 100,000 investment, we might be looking at something different in terms of taxes coming into the city or other.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Then my last question is kind of just more of a highlight around the Grow 1000. I did see, as we had a little break, that we are looking for additional employers to be part of these programs. And so, I think I saw a Facebook post the other day, like, why aren't young people, as employed anymore? And there was this whole thread, many of us, I got my first job at 14. I'm sure many of us had the same. And I think there's just competing pieces around, school and other extracurriculars, a lot more requirements to get into school. I see the parents shaking their heads. And so I just wanted to highlight, I think that those first employment experience have such a big impact. We know people are looking for those positive social ways to connect, and work is usually where you're at most of the day, and that's where you're probably socializing. So I just want to encourage any employers that might be watching, for all of us to think about it. I'm going to think about it as well. Are there individuals that we could host or support in our places of employment? So thanks for that update.
Yeah, thank you. All right, any final questions? I have a few. Go ahead, Commissioner Perdue.
Good morning. Just wanted to, I saw in a few different sections, increase wages to make sure that our team members, our seasonal team members, interns, whether it's internal, external, are making a living wage or close to. So just wanted to thank you all for that intentionality there. I wanted to follow up on the new Community Transformation Fund. I think I heard you say that it's not just for tech startups. Did I hear you correctly?
That's correct.
Okay. So in on slide 54, when you talk about the 100K, it's listed in two places. So I just want to make sure, or is it 200K or is it 100 and you just listed in two different places?
Yep, just
Okay.
100 listed in two different places.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then I noticed that a lot of the investments for Grow 1000, there's no dollar amount listed. Is that because it's mostly grant funded? Are we not sure how much it'll cost? Say more about that.
There are, and I can invite Connie Bohatch to come up, but the answer is yes and. So it's a little bit, we get funds from the employers directly to support some of the wages. We also have grant funds.
Yeah, thank you. So Kate started to explain that correctly in terms of, it's a combination of sponsorships and donations that we receive, as well as employers who pay directly for those wages. And so on an annual basis, we put together sort of a composite rate for each student in terms of what it will cost for the full program experience. And then some employers will then pay for those direct positions, and then for nonprofits, small nonprofits in the community, then they have sponsored placements.
Okay. So is there a budget request associated with this program?
So we do sort of a reconciliation in terms of, it's more operated more like a grant-funded program. And so we will carry over fund balance into, and it also crosses fiscal years, so it makes it a little more complicated.
Yeah.
So there's an appropriation for the year, and then we true that up in terms of that fund, in terms of the revenues received and the expenditures.
Let me just follow. So we budget for the employees we hire in the city. There'll be 70 that work directly for us. What Ms. Bohatch is referring to, the other programmatic costs. Some years we've got as much as $1 million total community donations and payroll.
That's a little high.
Well, it just depends. And so we don't ask the city to pay for what employers would pay. We direct bill the employers.
And then it's always based on how many youth are actually employed in the end.
Yeah.
So there's that as well.
Okay. Thank you for that. And then final question around the Smart Zone Operators contract, $1.8 million. Help me understand that dollar amount. And is that just to manage the project? Is that the bulk of the project? Can you explain a little more?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we're entering our third and final year under the MOU. So we RFP'd that 2.5 years ago. That's split between Spartan Innovations and Star Garden for all their professional services, space allocation, operation stuff, programming that they do, and the like. And so that is all approved in a budget that we go take through our authority that are eligible expenses under the Smart Zone Authority.
Okay.
So that, again, we're entering the final year of that 3-year contract in fiscal year '24.
And that's also funded through a tax capture, correct? For Smart Zone?
Yeah, majority of that is the tax capture for, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
That's the cost for 2 operators and not 1.
That is correct, right, so
Yeah.
it's split, yes, it is split.
So we basically doubled our effort in terms of encouraging tech incubation by having 2 operators.
Yeah, space for sure, and service providers, yep.
All right, with that, I'll close this portion of the update, and I think I'll real quickly call the question for the 2 action items, and then I'll turn the mic over to President of the Commission, Commissioner O'Connor, to finish us up for the last 2 presentations. So, Commissioners, I'm going to go ahead and call the resolutions, and these are just to set public hearings. This is a thing we do every single year as part of our budget process. Our CFO can come up, but I don't think I need you to go deep into the details. So the first item is a resolution scheduling a public hearing for Tuesday, May 16th on the proposed property taxes for our 2024 fiscal year. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Support.
All right, moved and supported. Ms. Claren, anything to add to this item?
The only thing I'll highlight is we discussed this. We mentioned it last Tuesday, the Clean Community Initiative that's increasing our refuse millage rate from 1.6 to 1.8. You'll notice one thing that first time I've seen this happen since I've been here is we don't have a millage rollback this year. This occurs when our we have inflation exceeding our 5% cap, and then with that, our property tax values have been growing less than inflation. So that's the end result of what causes that rollback. We don't have that this year. I don't know. You've been here longer than me, Mayor, if you've ever seen that happen. But
Not often.
Yeah, but we'll be talking more about the Clean Community Initiative in the work session ahead, I believe next week. So.
And again, this is just to set the public hearing here from the community. And we all read in the budget book that the increase in the refuse millage would add additional personnel as well as additional days for neighborhood cleanups. Commissioners, any questions or comments about scheduling the public hearing? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, it carries. And then a companion is a resolution scheduling a public hearing for the same date, Tuesday, May 16th, on the proposed 2024 service provision fees. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Support.
All right, moved and supported. Again, Ms. Claren, you want to tell us about these are fees that we have throughout the city. Some of them go up, some are new, some go away.
Right, and you'll see in the attachment to the item, they're categorized by how they relate to cost of living, if they're cost recovery, things of that nature. We have 1,268 fees proposed for 2024. 25 of these fees are new, and they're mainly related to the golf course fees, special, Parks and Rec as they get new gears into their gear library. We set up a rate for them, and then 5 others are related to workshop and camps. Yeah, it's an elaborate attachment. I can break it down more for you if you do have questions, and we have more time to discuss it at our next public hearing. So,
great, thanks. All right, commissioners, any questions or comments? All right, I appreciated how they were broken down this year, so thank you for that. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, it carries. All right, I'll turn it back to the city manager. Next, we have governmental excellence.
All right, we will proceed.
Okay. Doug Matthews, Assistant City Manager, and Commissioner Isasi. My first job was working in my uncle's welding shop at 14.
For cash, I assume.
So, governmental excellence, you'll see what the total investment is here. First couple of slides, we want to cover what our strategic plan objectives are, as well as some of the investments. These are things that we covered in the manager's initial budget review. In terms of our objectives, we're really talking about equity, we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about how we bring in, how we retain our employees, optimizing our workspaces, utilizing data to make decisions, growing a culture of innovation within the organization, as well as working with our community partners, which includes our legislative partners at the county, state, and federal government in order to get the work done. So when we look at continuity of services, fiscal sustainability, a lot of this relates to the funding streams that have been coming through, really starting with COVID, and now moving forward through some of the infrastructure funding that we're seeing come through, and making sure that we're prepared as a staff to be able to fully leverage those funds as they come through. When we talk about talent attraction and retention, of course, and this came up, I think, in the conversation with fire, the negotiated raises and benefits for employees is a continued investment. It was an important investment to make as we worked our way through collective bargaining over this past year. Continued investment in employee wellness, recruiting, hiring, retention. Of course, it is an incredibly competitive marketplace right now, and we want to make sure that we're in a position to bring in the best people that we can. Continuing to invest in people once they're here. You see tuition reimbursement. And then working on ways that we can manage our own pipeline. So increasing opportunities to bring students in to work and hopefully move into jobs. So investment in an executive internship program, the Public Works Academy, Grow 1000, a whole variety of activities that we're doing in that space. And then also looking at how we're investing in our equity programs, indigent defense, as well as strategic planning, and our performance management programs. When we look at our enhanced services going into the next budget year, of course, the enterprise resource planning is a huge investment. It also has a huge impact for the organization. I can say really since I've been here, as we've challenged various components of the organization to produce certain reports, to do things differently, to provide additional data, to cross-link that data with other systems, there's quite often a common culprit in our inability to do so, and it relates back to the ERP. Aligning the budget with our strategy actively on the front end, that relates back to our ERP, effective performance management, a whole variety of things, as well as linking our human resources systems to our financial systems. So really want to shine a light on that. It's going to be a big lift for the entire organization. It's likely a 2-year project, and it's going to require a lot of folks spending a lot of time to make sure that we get this right. We also, the mayor mentioned, have a facilities condition assessment underway. We're having that launched this month. That's another critical item that we identified fairly early, at least in my time here, which is we know where we stand, but we're not quite sure where we're headed when it comes to our facilities. We know that the workplace is changing. We know that the needs are changing. We know that the demands, both in and for, in some cases, if you look at 201 Market, the facilities and the land that we have. And we want to be in a better position to get ahead of those things as opposed to consistently responding to them. When we talk about talent attraction and retention, you'll see a couple more investments here in terms of bringing people into the organization early and developing them into positions, which we found to be very successful. I know the Water Department is continuing to invest in that area. The Public Works Academy has been very successful. And then continued investment in innovation and continuous improvement, as well as technology for the organization. And then last, on a operational scale, thinking differently about some of the things that we already do. So investing an additional $100,000, specifically with the intent of being able to break apart some of our larger contracts to allow smaller local businesses to participate in our mowing programs. And this $80,000 for increase in the Grand Rapids Library's bandwidth is one part of a bigger effort that we've been working with the library on. It doesn't show up in here because it's not our investment to make, but the library came to us about 8 months ago to talk about the condition of their technology. And we have been actively working and consulting with them. They have some pretty significant vulnerabilities. And help them develop a plan going into next year. And we're going to kind of walk alongside them and actually bring them into our infrastructure to be able to manage their systems better. And that's really in the collaboration of partnership and a shared interest in making sure that our community's personal data, quite honestly, is safe as they navigate through our public systems. So a couple of things that I wanted to highlight specifically. We mentioned the facilities master plan. We're just launching that right now. So the scoping is complete, and now we're starting to prioritize which facilities are first going to be looked at. This is really about the built infrastructure that we have. So this doesn't include some of the infrastructure, for instance, lift stations and things like that. This is really about the places that humans occupy. We do want to go back and take a look at that, but that'll work through our enterprise utilities as opposed through this kind of an enterprise-wide activity. Of course, 201 Market and Scribner is another big item. I mean, this, from an infrastructure standpoint, this is the ERP of our infrastructure work over the next 2 years. So the construction manager and the design team have been selected. That work is underway, and we're continuing to work with partners to find ways that we can shorten the distance on that project to get them on the site as soon as possible, because I know that there's a real interest in getting that facility built and open. The challenge is we don't want to do that at the expense of our people. We want to make sure that we balance that our people are still able to do their work in the interim, and that's one of the tensions that we're working through right now. talked a little bit earlier about the enterprise resource planning, some of the things that we're going to be able to do with that new system. Again, we want to be very thoughtful and intentional about how we roll that out. We expect to have the first phase of that ready probably late spring of next year. It's not all going to happen at once. We're not flipping a switch. So systems will roll on as they're tested and as they're validated over a period of time, likely about 2 years. And then wanted to talk a little bit about the Innovation and Continuous Improvement Program, shine a light on that and where we are and some of the impacts that they've had. They've been, Jennifer and the team that she's built around her, which is employees that are interested in this work, have done a lot of work over the year that they've been working. Some of the things that they've really focused on, one is how do we activate employee ideas? How do we better consult and coach departments to be able to be part of the work? What are some things that we can do cross-organization to bring people together on big problems? We'll talk about DICE as an example of that here shortly. The Innovation Challenge. So we did an Innovation Challenge in 2020 that was launched actually pre-COVID. On operational efficiencies. We're going to talk about some of the impacts of that. And we now have an innovation challenge out about how we can be more sustainable as an organization. And then the last one is capacity building. So helping employees and empowering employees with the tools to be able to do this work within their departments on a regular basis. So if we look at some of the success stories, one of the items that came out of that 2020 process was an urban wood reuse project. And in the fall, they launched a wood giveaway over at Domtar specifically to clear the massive collection of logs that we had over there in the yard that were just sitting out there rotting. And the idea from the employee was, there are artists, artisan, furniture makers, a whole variety of folks who may want to use this wood if given the opportunity to claim it when it's still usable. The first step was to clear the yard. So they held a giveaway, gave away about a third of the wood that was out there, and had an agreement with someone to take the remainder of what was usable and about a third of what wasn't. So now that the weather's cleared up, we're hopeful that we're going to make some pretty good progress there. The net savings there is just under $100,000. And then once we have a system in place to notify people and have them come pick that product up, we're hoping to largely eliminate the $60,000 a year that we spend in chipping and disposing of that wood. As it stands, not to mention that if it's used for some permanent reuse, it's an effective carbon sequestration. The innovation learning teams, so this is really bringing people together and empowering them to do this innovation work. I mentioned DICE. We took a step back on DICE after first launching it to be more intentional in the design and implementation, putting the community first in the conversation. In fact, Jennifer, as we're speaking, is in a session with a room full of community members that are participating in a design session specifically on what those public safety initiatives ought to look like within their communities. We've also done similar work with fleet and facilities on internal customer service, as well as the development center. And Commissioner O'Connor, you had mentioned, some of the concerns about moving things through the permitting process. Well, the innovation office worked with the development center. They held some open sessions with applicants for permits, regular applicants for permits, immediately identified some opportunities to streamline that process, as well as opportunities to rethink their own work schedules to be able to better and more efficiently handle the workload as it comes through. And I raise those as just items where really what we're talking about when we talk about innovation, sustainability, equity, while we have leaders in the organization that are doing that work, our goal is that everybody in the organization is doing that work. And those leaders are setting up programs that develop the skills for others to be able to do. I'm going to hand it off now to Mr. Canfield. He's going to talk a little bit about the legislative priorities and our status there.
Thank you. Mr. Matthews, may I have the clicker?
Can you handle it?
If you will. Thank you, sir. All right, Commissioners, the next two slides list the city's top legislative priorities, which are advocated for by our Government and Legislative Affairs Officer, Karen Farrick, and that is in partnership and coordination with our internal and external partners. So this slide lists the city's top policy priorities, including legislation that would give the city an option to create a land bank, use brownfield redevelopment tools to increase affordable housing supply, enhance funding for convention, entertainment, and tourism promotion, improve public safety accountability, allow for more flexible municipal investment options, and remove the preemption that prevents us from banning weapons in municipal buildings. And this slide lists the city's top legislative funding priorities, including for MLK Park and Roosevelt Park lodges, safe neighborhoods and police relationships, affordable housing, a solar array at Butterworth Landfill, stormwater improvements along Butterworth Street, a program to identify lead-based paint hazards in rental housing, rapid rehousing for unhoused individuals, and a replacement Division Avenue Fire Station and new Kalamazoo Fire District Station that were discussed previously. The next two slides provide an update on the 311 Customer Service Center, which is led by Customer Service Manager Angela Dorr. And that center includes the 311 call center and the service counter on the Monroe level of City Hall. So this slide shows the significant relationship between 311 staffing availability and responsiveness. And availability is shown in the green line on the chart. And it does take into account things like vacation, leaves of absence, vacant positions, and so on. As you can see, call center response times were challenged during the pandemic and have improved significantly since early 2022, with wait times down approximately 70% to what we consider a satisfactory level of less than 3 minutes, but not yet to our goal, which is faster than 30 seconds. And response time essentially means hold time, time to answer. Strategies we've used to staff up and stabilize staffing are listed in the left-hand column, and they include proactively staffing up to minimize the impact of vacancies, supplementing with additional temporary staff, improving the efficiency and effectiveness of staff onboarding, and staying nimble, learning from, and further intensifying the use of these strategies. And this is what we propose to do increasingly in the coming months, further intensify the use of these strategies. Next slide includes important continuous improvement initiatives being led by 311. These include courtesy callback to improve service and satisfaction when wait times are extended. We propose to do more of that to actually calibrate the system so that more people can choose a callback if they wish. 311 has also developed organization-wide and department-specific reporting on trends, topics, and interactions. This provides insights and improves services both at the executive level and within departments. 311 is also standardizing written communications to improve customer service and efficiency, and working to identify the best path forward for next-level service channels such as chat, and using their considerable knowledge base to give more self-service options. And with that, I will hand the clicker back to Assistant City Manager Matthews. Willingly.
Thank you, sir. Okay, just a quick spotlight on the capital investments. Of course, $58 million related to the relocation from 201 Market over to the Road Commission site. $15 million in additional improvements to city facilities, as well as an additional $400,000 in repairs over at the 61st District Court. When we look out at the horizon, there's a couple of things that I just wanted to flag for you all. One, of course, is we're actively in recruitment for a new Human Resources Director. We anticipate there may be some other retirements over the next 18, 24 months. So, that's an opportunity to continue the transformation that we've been working towards when it comes to human resources. We just released the RFP for our third-party administrator on the healthcare contract. We anticipate increases there. I don't know that there's a year that we've seen, substantial decreases. We were able to really work down the numbers the last contract that we had. So it'll be interesting to see what it is that we get back. We want to continue to prioritize employee wellness and some proactive support for chronic and high-cost claimants, as well as our pharmacy benefits, which are some of the big drivers in the plan. And then the last one is, once we're done with the facilities plan, we've got to start to work up an implementation strategy and what that looks like. That includes all of our facilities. We're already having a conversation about the fire facilities specifically, so that we've got a roadmap for the future, and even possibly some disposition plan for the assets that we've got and what the future facilities look like for our workforce. And with that, you want me to just go straight through Engaged and Connected? So on Engaged and Connected, we want to make sure that we're enhancing communication with the public, elevating resident voice, and make sure that we're incorporating processes to collect the feedback that we get and operationalize it. If you look at our continuity, continuing community engagement in vital streets, digitally with our neighborhood associations, with parks and recreation, and then through some of the traditional communications channels that we've had for a number of years. One of the things in here that is continuity of services, but it is effectively going to be new. It started this year, but we'll see the effects next year, is the onboarding of our community engagement manager, and the work that she's going to be doing to develop a framework and a plan for how we engage with the public in the future. And then, of course, we've got Summit, we've got match funds, some of the other neighborhood-oriented investments that we've traditionally made from year to year. If we look at enhanced services going into the next year, the manager has brought forward some additional investments on the communication side. That includes staffing to focus on the campaign-based communication that's always been a gap for us as an organization. When we have big things, how do we handle those without necessarily having to outsource them at 3 times the cost? So that's one of the goals that we have there, as well as additional support for our digital communications work. We want to continue to expand the Wi-Fi connectivity that we started during COVID through our parks to make that accessible to more people that may not otherwise have access. Ms. Behrens had mentioned the additional support for Develop With Us. Ultimately, that is a neighborhood engagement activity to empower those voices in the development process. And then the library is investing in some additional funds for both marketing communications as well as community engagement on their side. So if we look at the horizon topics on this side, I already mentioned the community engagement strategy. There's going to be some subsequent training there that we're going to put the organization through so that we're all working on the same page when it comes to the work. This summer, we are going to be putting out the first RFP in 3 decades for operation of our public access television station. That's not necessarily an indication of dissatisfaction with the Community Media Center, but it's the responsible thing to do with public funds to compete that process and to articulate what our goals are with the program. We really feel that public access is an opportunity for job skills development. That also has opportunities for general hobbyist use and things like that, and we want to make sure that we lean into those things. We're going to have some pretty significant community engagement coming up based on the outcomes of the rate study for materials management. You'll learn more about that next Tuesday. But the rate study is not just modeling our current business model. We've asked them to model out 5 separate scenarios that could have some pretty significant impacts on how it is that we go about collecting and disposing of refuse, recycling, organics, you name it. And that's got to be a community conversation. And then The last one I just want to mention is participatory budgeting is still happening. I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to bring the first couple of contracts to you at the end of the month. But we also have a measurement contract in place. So the Johnson Center is going to be helping us measure the impact of those projects over time, and we're hoping to be able to report that back out to you all as well. City Manager?
All right, we'll pause here, see what questions you have on this section.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Canfield and Mr. Matthews. I'll turn to my colleagues. Any questions for either of those folks? Commissioner Sassi?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I have a few questions. Hold on, let me go back up here. For the innovation pieces, I think it's really interesting. This is kind of like almost is a little bit ahead of our community engagement model, because I think in that process, we always try to, people say, you're not listening to us because we've told you what we wanted. And then there are sometimes different variations of what that end result will be, right? So it's like managing expectations in the process. Is there anything that we can learn from this process internally with innovation as it applies to that community engagement model work?
Absolutely. And, one of the things that has organically happened is that there's a very tight partnership between equity and engagement, sustainability, and the Innovation Office. And they've been not just sharing ideas, but actually sharing and cross-training on resources. So some members of the Equity Office have been co-presenters for innovation on some of the projects that they've been involved with. So yeah, the answer is yes, absolutely, and that is the intent. There's there's certainly a blurry line between the innovation work and the engagement work.
Okay, thank you. On the legislative policy pieces, I think, I don't know when that meeting happened, I'll be honest. I think last year, and who's on the legislative committee? You, Mr. Chair, and Commissioner Moody, and the mayor, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
I think it would be helpful for me and perhaps our new colleagues, just given the sense of like where each one of these is at in a policy piece. I know we've seen a lot more movement in the legislative body right now, and some of these we've had for some time. But if we could, we don't need to review them right now, but if we could get something in the future that kind of says, this is likely to happen at this time frame, or, we're going to keep on pushing it, but we might not see it in this session. So that would be helpful. Appreciate the information on 311. I think, we get a lot of questions about that. I think the callback piece is really helpful. Obviously, the online, appreciate the information to try to identify other ways. And also recognizing that, if somebody does really good, where's Angela? Then they probably go to another department. I've managed some of those departments in different organizations. So thank you. I think I just want to recognize that for those, who sometimes get frustrated with the department, the onboarding. They have to know a lot about a lot of things in the city. But I appreciate that. And I wonder, as we kind of work through these challenges from the pandemic, I think we used to get a little bit more detailed reports as commissioners say, I always try to include Angela, mostly for my own accountability, that I'm going to remember that I'm going to follow up on something. But I don't think we're at probably the pre-pandemic place where we were getting like a monthly report, like, hey, these things have been addressed, these things have not been addressed. So I think that would be helpful. But I also recognize we had to make choices about, staffing, and certainly the residents having that support is my priority. As we talk about, well, let me see, am I going into the different, nope, okay, this is the last one for this section. As we talk about the improvements to our city facilities, I know we talked about the master plan the other day, continued to just ask that question about our owned but not occupied buildings, and just those conversations that we've had with those individuals who are occupying those spaces. So I know that they're not included in the 96 or 66 of what's going to be in the master planning process, but I did want to ask that question again. That's all we're just doing section by section, right? Okay, thanks.
When you say owned but not occupied.
So I think about, specifically thinking about the West Michigan Works, the Scribner building. So, or it's not on Scribner, I'm sorry. I'm getting my West Side stuff mixed up. Straight Street? Yeah,
Right.
Straight Street. So thinking about that building. Thanks.
Very good. Commissioner Robbins, Commissioner Perdue? Commissioner Perdue?
Good morning, still. Really quick follow-up question. You mentioned under innovation, some of the work around, the changes around contracting. One thing that I've heard from small businesses, particularly those who are still, I think the term is working in the business as opposed to working on. So if it's a plumbing company, they're the ones still kind of going out doing those calls every day, and don't have kind of that back office infrastructure to go through some of our application processes with the city. Curious if that has been a topic of conversation, and seen as an opportunity to add some support, whether it's technical assistance or other ways to innovate that process so we can better meet the needs of those super small businesses who are still working in instead of on.
As a matter of fact, it was. And one of the things that came out of that initial engagement was a pretty simple fix, which was providing a more accessible version of the instructions on how to complete a permit. They weren't readily accessible to folks. So somebody raised their hand and asked the question, and the department said, well, yeah, sure, we can do that. Created a cleaner PDF that folks could use and keep at their desk. And, it's a quick fix that folks were satisfied with. But there are additional things that can be done, which include simplifying some of the straightforward permitting work, so that it is not as daunting working through the system to get those things done.
Yeah, and if I'm recalling that example correctly, they might have been going through one of our certification processes to be recognized as a minority-owned business. And so it was some of the kind of the financial pieces, accounting pieces that really were difficult for them to get together without that back office support.
And that's going to be more of an ERP thing. That is something that is high on the list, recognizing the burden that it currently places on folks, just simply from a reporting standpoint. And the system certainly doesn't help in that respect. We want to be able to make it easier for the folks to come into the system. We want to make them easier to update their information, and we want to make it easier for us to be able to report out on our success. And right now, that is a multi-system, multi-step process that does have impacts on the actual business. So that is something that we've prioritized. In fact, I'm working separately with a separate startup cohort on pilots that we might be able to do to improve the front end of that system in the interim, and test it with a couple of folks and see how it works.
Good to know that's a priority. Thank you.
Just two questions for me. Just staying on ERP, $7 million ARPA. I mean, when we talked about that a week ago, we said we didn't know where that money was coming from, whether we were going to bond from that, whether we were going to use ARPA. I know that $7 million is a year one investment, but, a week later, now it says $7 million ARPA. So just want to make sure that, feels like we didn't know something a week ago and now it's solidified in stone. So it's a little frustrating. Sorry to point that out, but it is frustrating. Just stay in the district court here, $400,000 in repairs for a district court building. The building's half empty, and we're going to go dump $400,000 of general fund dollars into it, or capital fund dollars to it. So again, also, if you can't figure out how to make that building make money and lease some of that unused space in there, then I'm not real keen on spending $400,000 to update it for something. So unless there's a plan to figure out how to make that vacant space in that building, reduce the cost burden to taxpayers, then that's also very frustrating.
Let's go back to the comment on the ERP system. And now, while I was not at Fiscal Committee, I believe is where it was discussed, obviously we were planning on a funding strategy for it at the time, and I'm not sure what the exact question was, but ARPA was always a potential funding source for it, or issuing debt.
So I do know we talked about the possible use of ARPA at the time. The total not to exceed amount on the project right now is $10.3 million, but that's over 5 years. So in the window where we're able to use the ARPA, roughly the next 2 years, that's where we get the $7 million of ARPA. And then the remainder is when our current system, the CGI A360, rolls off. We'll take that funding and plug that in to fill that gap for the remainder of the years.
So we're going to be paying for 2 systems for our foreseeable future?
As we're going through implementation, we're obligated to A360 through March of 2025. So we're going live,
So really, it's
within a year and a half.
So it's really a $13 million proposal, not a $10 million proposal.
If
we got to count the
if you're
existing.
additive, yep.
Well, let's be clear. It's like buying a new car,
Yep.
and you have a current car. You have to.
We have payments.
You have to make payments, but
That's if you keep both cars, right? Like, last time I bought a new car, I traded it in, right? Like,
but the way these systems are, you can't just turn one in one day and start a new one. You have to have parallel implementation for configuration, or else things will really go afoul. So it's a long lead time for implementation to make sure payroll is done correctly, vendors get paid appropriately, and so that's the reason why you have the duality of both systems. And that's pretty standard project management for these systems, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
And then for the district court building, we don't own that building. We pay rent to the county, so that is our share of the cost right now.
and what are they doing with that $400,000?
I can
I'd definitely like some more detail on
Sure,
that.
sure, I can get that.
Yeah. All right. Any further questions from my colleagues? Commissioner Sassi?
We're going to the next section, or?
Yeah, go right
Okay.
ahead.
All
Whatever you
right,
want.
thank you. So I just had a couple of questions, and then in this last section was around the timeline for the community engagement model. So I know we've, I think, been talking about this, and I think about the number of things that we've had this year, whether it's new property code maintenance ordinance to drones to conversations around homelessness and housing. There are so many pieces where, the reality is not everybody's going to agree, but I think understanding what that community engagement model looks like. I didn't know that we were going to have a survey about drones, and so that was surprising to me. So then I had individuals who were asking me about that. So I'm very interested in the timeline for that model.
I would anticipate, the individual just came on board about a month ago. And we want to be intentional about how it is that we build this out. I mean, we want to work with the community and we want to work with our departments. She's still working to identify who in the organization is doing this kind of work, what it is that they're doing. So we're doing kind of a landscape analysis right now. I wouldn't want to commit that office to having a draft plan together, honestly. Hopefully we'd have something drafted out by the end of the year, but something that's implementable by the spring.
Okay.
I think would be a reasonable expectation. And nobody's throwing anything at me, so I'm going to.
Okay. And then the follow-up question to that is.
With one amendment. But to your point on large engagement efforts that we know have a lot of community interest, like on public safety or housing, even without a plan, I think in the future, we would try to get the added expertise of the new talent we have in the organization to help our departments. Because even though you didn't, the intent came from a good space. Mm-hmm. This was something that was not required. All that was required for the drones was a public hearing. Mm-hmm. And I think the police department intended to have additional meetings as well as engagement, but now we know we can have more comprehensive discussions around that.
Yeah, and that's certainly the goal. Like I said, with each one of these departments, each one of these business lines, is that we have somebody inside the organization that can consult, work, and develop the skills within each one of those departments. She's already doing that work, so we can start to align things. But in terms of having the plan, I would say probably this time next year.
Okay. And so just I feel like this is an add-on because to me, the language access shouldn't be something outside of it. It's part of the community engagement model. I think really just looking at what, I'm so glad that we offer and we have it available. I'm really interested in what is the utilization and are we offering it, I think last commission meeting, we had somebody who accessed it for our night meeting. I don't remember the last time somebody did. And I know it's not just in our meetings, but just looking at what is that utilization overall and how does that fit, sort of in that larger community engagement model, would be helpful to know that utilization piece. Because it's like, do we need different engagement pieces? Do we need just to try to connect in some other way? And then these are not really so much about, the dollar amount. I think to kind of the conversation point, the amount of money that we have feels smaller and smaller with these other things that we need to do. So trying to identify what are some of the maximizing effects here. For like We Are GR, I think, I read that, as soon as I get it, I probably know all the information, but it's really helpful. And just kind of trying to look for ways that we can embed, other partner groups into some of those mainstream communication. So thinking about our neighborhood associations, other partners, can we have like corners where individuals can supply us content? And I know that happens, but I think we've gotten, probably all of us, just requests from particularly neighborhood associations for additional supports for communications. And I'm thinking, how can we sort of include this in things that we're already doing? Because they probably have a broader mass connection point than maybe an individual Facebook page or something like that. So. And then that was my last question. Then I have one comment is around some of the communication around the principal residence exemption. Will we also be looking at this for like the water and sewer dollars to support? I think we had that question when we did the approval of the rates in December, just kind of asking, what was that usage of those dollars?
You mean in terms to market the affordability programs? Yeah, and as a matter of fact, they I want to say just recently made some staffing changes so that they had somebody that was more focused on outreach and communications.
Okay.
To kind of run in alignment with what it is that we've done with materials management, refuse and recycling, where we now have somebody that's doing that work on a regular basis.
Okay. I'll just give a shout out to the Mobility's Facebook page. They have a lot of good communication. I feel like we have some different voices on our social media. I feel like you're able to see that and connect. So, okay, my last comment was what Commissioner Perdue had just asked about some helping on the process. I just want to remind, we do have a consultant that works, I think, with micro-local businesses, with women and minority-owned businesses, who can help people kind of go through that certification process. And I feel like AJ just talked to me about that.
Well, yeah, so that's a program to help local businesses. So MLB is a designation that we developed. And then you've got MBE, WBE. And what we wanted to do was make sure that those that are eligible could get that MBE, WBE certification, because it opened up opportunities beyond the city of Grand Rapids. Because as you know, we've got certain state limitations on how it is that we do our purchasing processes that aren't necessarily, they don't bind federal processes, for instance. So that was really the crux of that program, was to help folks navigate that certification process. But certainly we are available to be able to provide some guidance in that respect. The goal, of course, is that the process itself isn't so onerous that folks need to pick up the phone. So we're trying to attack it from both sides.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that we have made it, these multiple investments to support business owners in these processes. Thank you.
Commissioner Robbins?
Yes, thank you. First is just a comment, second's a question. The comment being, I'm happy to see that there's engagement about modeling some alternative methods for sustainable collection of refuse. I think that that's something that I've heard a lot of feedback about. I know Commissioner O'Connor has from the neighborhood organizations and other residents. So I'm very happy to see that that's a priority for sure. And then second of all, I know I've had a lot of conversations with people about the methods in which we engage the community for engagement. And I think especially as we look at the growing age demographics within our city, is there a way you could speak to maybe the different methods or modes in which some of these enhanced communication dollars will be used to kind of broaden the horizon of how we reach out to people?
Well, the communications dollars are probably more focused on the communication piece than the engagement piece. But of course, we've got the investment that we've made in the community engagement person on the other side of that. As someone that's been doing community engagement work for 20 years, it's one of those processes that is almost always additive. You add tools, but you very rarely subtract any of them, which means we've got to keep our eye on the horizon, but understand that in-person work is still important. The door-to-door work is still important. The question is, how do we achieve those things? We've experimented with some things over the past couple of years on the digital side, including some instant polling, some text-based instant polling, like 48-hour polls where we can get quick feedback from folks that have signed up, and launching our digital engagement program, which actually was a product of, it was something we wanted to do, but became a product of COVID because we had to continue to work and engage with the community. That tool allows us to start to integrate what we do in person with what we do digitally. So you've got strictly online methods where folks can be able to provide feedback, but you can take that same tool and implement it, for instance, on a screen in a room and have folks do it via text. You can create a printed version of it to be able to go out in the streets. You can create a tablet version of it if you have folks going door to door and you can help them fill it out. That's actually how we did the voting on participatory budgeting. The question is, number one, how do you meet people where they're at to be able to get their feedback? Number two, how do you do it in a way where you're not managing 12 different systems? And we're trying to be intentional about that, and I'm hopeful that that's part of what the planning process will result in, is kind of defined. These are the systems of record, this is why, and this is how they connect to the goals. Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. And I know I had skimmed through this whole book, and I thought I saw some metrics on Facebook engagement and unique users and kind of like their click-through rates. But I would just be interested to see maybe that expanded to other platforms, and maybe I missed it. But I think just in having feedback from a lot of other individuals within our fastest growing age demographics, that's just been one thing that I've heard is, I don't have Facebook, or I travel a lot and I'm not home when people stop by to ask me questions. So I guess it's both a comment and a question of just wondering how maybe we ask them, like what media sources or where do you get your information from, or where would you prefer to? And then I think kind of building off that, using these resources, which I think are great. So.
Mm-hmm. And if I could add, Commissioner, we were just talking yesterday about the contractual relationship with the Community Media Center and what programs are offered through there, and the radio programming that occurs there. And while a lot of our engagement is digital, online, and some televised, in other communities, you could listen to a city commission meeting in your car on your radio. And I don't think we have any radio programming event on a frequent basis. There's the cities where you spend a lot of time driving around, obviously, but there may be other things though in terms of engaging that older demographic that you mentioned that we may be able to do differently, and so I'm looking forward to the outcome.
Yeah. It's definitely an inclusive process. The other thing I'll say on the radio is that what I've found is that the ones that are most likely to listen to a city commission meeting on the radio are actually your Spanish speakers. So there's also an equity aspect there. So there will continue to be opportunities, continue to be things that we look at both on the front end of tech and on the analog side to be able to make sure that we're reaching people where they're at.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Any further questions for Mr. Matthews or Mr. Canfield? All right. Hearing none, I don't know if the city manager wants to wrap up with anything.
Yeah, I want to, first of all, thank you for your time today, and I hope one of the things that you gleaned from discussion here, even when we talked about safety, it was not solely the responsibility of the fire department, police department, that it is integrated in a lot of the areas, and so we believe that there are departments that are responsible directly for emergency management, emergency response. But we've talked about other things that will improve the social determinants of health and safety, from economic development to youth job placement to, you'll hear more next week about some of the environmental issues around creating safe communities. And you see that interconnectedness. And one of the things that we've realized is that our Office of Oversight and Public Accountability, I didn't allude to this earlier, is also more than just public safety oversight. It is very much engaged in crime prevention and safe community work as well. So I appreciate all the departments that presented today. We will make sure to the legislative funding priorities we add municipal court funding. That was real clear today to try to really make our needs further known in Lansing, and we're not alone, and so there may be other partners, but I think we need to talk to our local delegation and make them aware of some of the issues that we're having in our court system. So looking forward to the future discussion on the 9th at 10 o'clock. We'll try to keep the agenda a little light. We have quite a few items on count, but they should go pretty quick. I think we're proposing to bring forth the authority budgets for that meeting, so that'll be a cow. But thank you for your time. If you have any questions, please email them to me or the CFO, and we'll make sure we get them back to you. So far, we have not received any emailed questions from any commissioners, and so our intent is, if we don't get them in writing, if we hear of interest, we'll make sure we try to factor that into the briefing as we prepare to come forward. So thank you.
Thank you, City Manager. And as the City Manager mentioned, May 9th is our next regular City Commission meeting, which we will continue the budget workshop. May 16th, we have a date scheduled in case we do have any additional budget follow-up. The budget hearing will be that night at 7 p.m. and hopeful adoption of our budget on May 23rd. With that, we will turn to public comment, and we will open the podium for any public that would like to make comment here this morning. All right, seeing no one from the public to make comment, we'll close that public hearing. And with that, we will adjourn our meeting here at 12:16. Thank you, everyone.